Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Indra in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 71, Two of These Days. The next morning, Konoha was waiting for the Suna troops, less than 2 kilometers away, to engage. There's something wrong, Hanabi said, focusing her Byakugan. Hinata had always had better range than most Hyuga, including Niji back then, extending to around 10 kilometers, if she narrowed it to telescopic vision. And she had the stamina to wield it for longer. And Niji had been better at using its panoramic vision, able to make use of multiple insights at the same time, at a range of up to 2 kilometers, which was something Hinata simply couldn't do. And he could focus it to perceive almost anything in a range up to 200 meters around him by using the Byakugan's panoramic, telescopic, and penetrating vision at the same time. Hanabi, on the other hand, didn't have Hinata's range. She didn't have Niji's skill with multiple insights. What she did have, on the other hand, was the clearest Byakugan in the clan. Besides walls made of dense chakra, obstacles meant nothing to her eyes. That included skin, and she could see through a human body with more clarity than even Niji. Tenketsu that might as well have been invisible to most Hyuga appeared to her in full detail. Which would have made her a great medic, as well. But she had always preferred the rush of adrenaline that came with a fight, the feeling of flesh hitting flesh, testing her mettle, and relishing in a hard victory. Everything else fell to the wayside. But right now, her talents mostly meant that the army that was slowly moving toward their position, hidden deep in the earth, was entirely visible to her. Why the fuck are their IWA troops so close? She asked Suzuki, her team leader, who was standing next to her. They're a bit more than 5 kilometers away, coming from the northeast. We're in wind, which means they had to cross the whole land of rain. Suzuki grimaced, looking toward the heavens. They didn't answer his question, whatever it was that he had asked. Call for backup, he said to the nearest scout. Now. He turned to Hanabi. Thank you. We wouldn't have seen them coming without you. She shrugged. As the only Hyuga around, it's my job, isn't it? I'm sure IWA didn't expect any of us to come around these parts, she said, without too much bitterness. Suzuki didn't mention it. Is a retreat feasible? He asked, looking as though he already knew the answer. No. She shook her head. There are too many Suna troops around, too. As soon as they'd notice us leaving, especially if it's an all-out route, they would have an excellent opportunity of maximizing casualties. And it would be even worse if we started fleeing now, because they could take us down before we got a chance to reform. Suzuki grunted. He had been afraid of that. A fight it is, then. Kojiro, he called. Tell everybody to get in the third defensive formation. And no mud walls, this time. Iwa's on us. Which would mean they would have to rely on the forest much more. It was somewhat lucky they were not too deep in the land of wind territory, because there would only be desert to be found there. Ah, and Suzuki? Hanabi asked again, just before going to her own position, further away. Yes. He answered, putting on his battle armor. He definitely looked like Uchiha Madara's statues. Which she would never tell him, of course. Does Earth have any lava users? He paused. That depends what you mean by lave, but yes. Suzuki hesitated. Which type are you referring to? Volcanic ash, quicklime, acid? No. She said, focusing her Byakugan once more to make sure. Lava. There's a guy coming, his legs wrapped in it. Fuck. Yujito realized the Six Tails Jinchuriki was not around hot water. And after a few days, she wasn't certain if he were going to come here at all. She hadn't seen Naruto's friends since the time they had split, but her sensitive nose had picked up on Karen's scent recently. She had apparently been headed toward the south. And she wasn't certain of it, but she thought she could pick up some worry in her scent. It was hard to tell from this distance, anyway, so she pushed it aside. There were more pressing concerns. Such as the fight against Kiri Ninja, who despite their lack of Jinchuriki, were managing pretty well, so close to the sea. Oh, her flames would still burn, of course, but she was expanding more of her stamina. And Jinchuriki or not, no one could fight day and night. The binding seals had been applied upon his back. He could not see how they worked on his own. Which meant he couldn't undo them. Naruto had long ago realized that despite what he used to believe before he got some unwanted personal experience with them, chakra-suppressing seals only really stopped the external use of it. The ones applied on him now still prevented things like elemental manipulation or strengthening, of course, since these had been some of the main concerns. But these features had to be slapped on top of the seals, because a pure chakra-suppressing seal wouldn't do that. Halting the true internal process or chakra production, especially without killing the person who'd wear the seals, was much more complicated. The best they could do was slow the chakra flow, and its regeneration rate. Naruto had more than enough of both, in normal circumstances. Which meant that with a little pushing and prodding, his wounds both physical and mental healed almost as fast as normal. To his warden's delight. Here was a prisoner who could take almost any sort of beating, and would be fine in the morning. He wondered if the man had taken it as a challenge. Because it definitely felt like it. No, he was not concerned with this aspect in particular, despite how more painful it was making his life, right now. The chakra having nowhere to flow but inward, it was feeding into his seals. More than usual. Pushing them beyond whatever restrictions they still had. Which meant the process had been happening before, too, even though he had not noticed it. It was no wonder the dragon had shifted, in the end. It had just reached its final stage. It was the same for Megatama, close to his navel, though he had never noticed its appearance shifting. Because how could it still be the same, when it had been the first seal he had painstakingly carved into himself, the start of everything? There was no way. And he felt its effects, now. He had thought he was going crazy, at first. Even from here, he could feel when night fell. Or rather, he could feel the moon rise. Not just the physical moon, the one that hung in the sky, that had a distinctly human-like chakra to it, strong enough that he could feel it sometimes. But the moon, the night itself. By now, he knew that the Uzumaki clan had seen something he had previously thought to be mere superstition. There was something most people could not perceive, behind the curtain. Or maybe he really was losing his mind. Whenever the sun faded, Amaterasu receding, he could feel Tsukuyomi's presence make itself known again. The night came and the moon and the stars, and all the lights in the sky shone bright. For a moment, time stopped trickling. It was beautiful. And humbling. He had seen something beyond the veil. What could petty human conflict, on such a grand scale, be worth spilling so much blood, causing so much pain over? Naruto already knew that he could not limit himself to seeing the world as most ninja did. It was just so easy to fall to hatred, the way things were. Dehumanizing the other guy, the other village, the other nation. Seeing them as nothing more than a bag of blood that needed to be destroyed. And at the same time, he had finally accepted that there would be people that he would need to kill. Not just Akatsuki. He'd do his best to minimize the number of victims, of course, but he knew there would simply be no way around it. Some of them would need to go. And he would need to keep himself grounded, to not fall into the same pitfalls that other people who had started with similar intentions had ended up falling into. Because that's just how rotten the shinobi world really was. People being murdered was just routine. Men and women, whose only real ideological difference was that they had been born a few hundred kilometers away from each other, torturing, raping and killing each other in the most brutal ways they could think of. Or maybe they survived, only to be beaten to death during a joke of an interrogation, despite the official regulations in place. This one, he knew pretty well, by now. Villages killing their own people, throwing them away once they were of no more use to them, or it simply was more convenient. This was the status quo. They lived in an era of tension and war. Nothing would make people listen, other than power. The only difference was how to achieve it, how well you did that, and how history would remember you. Winners. Losers. Uchiha Madara, who was considered a betrayer and a madman by today's standards, had known it. Senju Hashirama, who was considered a peaceful idealist by today's standards, had known it. Switch a few things around, and the reverse could easily have been true. As his perspective expanded, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he could do something about the state of the world, no matter how presumptuous, how arrogant it seemed. No. He would do something about it. Even if it took some drastic action to do so. Hanabi, as their team's only Hyaga, fell into more of a support role. She would prefer being in the thick of it, honestly, but just because she wanted to fight didn't mean it was the best idea for the rest of them. Both the Suna and IWA platoons had stopped moving for a moment, likely smelling something was off. They still hadn't seen her, but they knew that something had made Konoha change their strategy. IWA would wait until Suna attacked, then. The standoff was tense. She could see how nervous some of the Konoha's ninja looked, and wondered if she was as pale as they were. It started suddenly. Suna started moving some of their troops, trying to flank them. They didn't notice the IWA ninja, apparently. Or they had known all along. Konoha counterattacked, a fourth of their numbers going straight for the Suna troops on the side away from IWA. Sasuke split from them, heading straight for IWA. Suna's wind jutsu were vicious. Not all of them used wind as a sharp tool, like the few Konoha ninja who could use the element did. Why would they, when blunt force worked just as well to smash into their defenses? A ball of compressed wind shattered against a wall. Hanabi ducked low, avoiding the worst of the debris. There were IWA ninja under them. Good. Down under. She shouted in warning, like they had planned. 5 Konoha ninja weaved hand signs, slamming down their hands on the muddy earth at the same time. Earth release, dark swamp. The ground beneath them turned into mud suddenly, forcing some of the unlucky IWA shinobi to inhale it, instead of the air they normally extracted from the earth with their jutsu. Konoha was ready for it, and they stood over the mud as if it were water. Fire in the hole! Someone screamed, and they all leaped away. Behind herself, Hanabi could see the reinforcements had arrived. Fire style, great fireball! Several men shouted at the same time. One shout came louder over the others. Fire style, piercing hell strike! The mud turned into a raging fire pit, and the screams of the people trapped in it echoed in the forest. Oh God, why does it have to be him? Still, she was relieved the help had come so quickly, even though it was only 20 shinobi. Including Uchiha Toru has finally arrived. She hoped this was some sort of weird strategy to draw the enemy's attention on him. Then he turned serious. Let's go then, men, women. We have a position to defend. A burning boulder the size of a carriage hurtled through the air, smashing into the clearing Sasuke was standing in, alone. His eyes flashed, and its heat dissipated easily, until only rock remained. Then came an older man, walking confidently, his chakra reminding Sasuke of his own. Within him, the one tail was silent. As he was most of the time, since he kept it that way with his Sharingan. Silent and sleeping. Forever waiting. Only strong emotions could stir it from its sleep. It had the downside of leaving him unaware when another Jinchuriki was coming close, but by now, Sasuke knew damn well the One-Tails was not going to help him with that anyway. Also, the man's burning chakra was a story in itself, and he didn't need the beast inside his gut to tell him that he was dealing with someone like him. Sasuke nodded in greeting. Enemy or not, this was somebody whose strength he could at least respect. Uchiha Sasuke, he said. The older man nodded in return. I'm Rashi. Ah, he knew that name. That meant he held the 4 tails. He wouldn't have figured on his own, well, no, he would have. There were only 2 Jinchuriki in IWA as he never had been that great at sensing chakra. If Rashi wasn't being so obvious about it, he was pretty sure he wouldn't even have noticed he was a Jinchuriki in the first place. Came here alone. Rashi guffawed. Well, I heard about your fighting style before. I've heard of yours, too. Sasuke nodded. Wouldn't want our poor allies to get caught in the crossfire, huh? No. Sasuke said, smiling slightly. We really wouldn't want that. So. Rashi continued. I've been wondering. Which of your flames, or my lava burns the brightest? Molten rock encased his fists, the heat that emanated from it making the air shimmer around him. Sasuke held his hand out. A dark blade appeared into it, in a wave of flames. Wind screeched around him, and the next instant, he was covered head to toe in bright flames that didn't burn him. Rashi grinned. It's been a while since I got to let loose. I hope you won't disappoint, Leaf Boy. Same goes to you, old rockhead. Sasuke slipped into the Uchiha Kenjutsu stance, his Sharingan spinning. The forest was starting to burn around them. None of them paid it any mind, their focus staying on their opponent. They moved. The Konoha platoon had a Hyuga among them. Shit. Muto Kyoko cursed. A fucking Hyuga. No wonder they had known they were coming. What the hell was Suna's intel good for, if they couldn't pick up on something like this? They were so fucking unreliable. If this were IWA, something like this would never have happened. And their backup had already come, too. Nobody had told them there was another Konoha platoon close by. Her hand balled into a fist, so tight that she thought she was about to draw blood. Don't worry, Muto-san. Okumura cut into her internal monologue, with a reassuring grin. We have him, after all. And her too, I guess. Not just this old ape. She breathed in. Then out. Slowly. Yeah. She nodded. You're right. Sorry, I lost my cool. The battle had already started. Rashi had split from them, going alone against the one-tailed Jinchuriki. Well, she didn't worry much about him. Nor did she care. He was an old bastard, but a crafty one. He'd do just fine against the much younger Uchiha. Speaking of Uchiha. Among several masked men that she knew belonged to Konoha's root division, and from the side, she spotted the telltale black hair and red eye that meant Uchiha. His hair was slightly curly, and he was using a short sword. For a short and terrifying moment, she thought it might be Uchiha Shisui. Which would mean they were all as good as dead. Kyoko calmed her beating heart. No, she repeated to herself. There is no way Konoha would bother sending him here. The man turned fully and she saw an eye patch, which almost made her sigh in relief. It was likely the Mirage Blade, then. Bad, yes. But nowhere near as terrible. Okumura was already in the thick of the fight and she joined in as well. The Uchiha's sword flashed, dancing around him. She almost snorted. This level of swordplay was good, but compared to Okumura's proficiency with twin daggers, he wouldn't last long. She weaved an earth technique, shaping a half-dome around the Uchiha. He was trapped, she knew. And as she expected, Okumura made short work of him, coming out of the dome, his face covered in blood just a few moments later. You got him? She asked, coming close to him. Yes. He nodded, wiping some blood off his forehead. Let's go. This is only the start. She took a look at the dead Uchiha. Maybe they could bring the corpse back. There were always ways they could. Cold steel bit her neck and she fell to her knees, her ruined throat spilling rivers of blood. The illusion shattered. Okumura was dead already. The last thing she saw was one single red eye, staring at her with a bit of sadness. I don't want your pity, you leaf. Nothing. Toru was strong. Really strong. She had never realized. Maybe, just maybe, everything would be fine. Then he saw her and grinned. She could see the shadows behind his eyes, though. Ah, you're here too, little Hanabi. We're the same age, you. She shook with anger. How had she thought his coming here could have been good news? Yes. He nodded sagely. Let it all out, your anger, your passion. Chapter 72, Fire Pit. A fist encased in burning lava smashed into Sasuke's ribs like a cannonball, sending him hurtling toward the pool of liquid fire that already covered what had once been a forest. He grunted, and stood up on top of it, his manjikyo the only thing keeping the heat off of him. It was obvious both of them intended to finish this fast, striking fast and hard, each blow meant to either end the battle, or hide the actual finishing move. Sasuke coughed, cracked his neck and hoped his bruised rib would heal fast. Standing close and walking toward him was Rashi, his hands still smoking. He disappeared. Sasuke dodged under Rashi's leaping knee strike, pushed forward by a small explosion. His Sharingan had seen him coming. There was no time for hesitation. Not against an opponent like this. Rashi was too close for a strong sword strike. Sasuke whirled around, lunging forward with a flaming straight punch. It connected with Rashi's back, and Sasuke caught him by his surprisingly durable kimono. He threw him to the ground violently, his sword flashing into his left hand. He stabbed down, aiming for the throat. Rashi deflected the strike and his katana plunged into the earth instead, turning it to crumbled ash. Rashi laughed with bloodied teeth. Not bad, Leaf Boy. The blood in his mouth sizzled. Not bad at all. He spat burning lava right at Sasuke, who leaped away. Rashi was upon him, driving him back relentlessly. Just as Sasuke himself was, he seemed to be immune to the heat of his flames. Or rather, seeing Rashi's damaged, lava-encased fists, he was too used to it. But that meant the man wasn't immune to fire either, despite his bravado. Sasuke parried with his sword, hoping to cut through the hardened magma. It didn't work, and parrying Rashi's extremely heavy strikes were making his forearms shake with each blow. He slid back, placing the sword next to his hip. He unsheathed it again in a flash, and delivered a flurry of quick wind slashes. The blades of wind crashed harmlessly against Rashi's arms, which he used to shield himself. It was a setup, though. Sasuke cut vertically with his blade, and the very air around Rashi exploded in a pillar of orange light. In the corner of his vision, he saw a shadow leaping. Of course someone would try to use the opportunity to kill him. His sword flashed again, cutting through the man's chest like butter. He put his attention back on the fight. Rashi leaped at him, covered in already dying flames, a mad grin on his face, both of his legs now encased in hardened lava. He was surprisingly agile for an older man, reminding him of a monkey. Rashi spun through the air, flipping forward and smashing into the earth with a heavy kick. Sasuke was already gone. He had tried genjutsu earlier, but to no avail. He wasn't as good as Shisui, Itachi, or even Toru, which he could admit when his cousin wasn't around, but it should have been enough. Except for the fact that Rashi was apparently in constant pain, which meant that most illusions didn't really hold him. If he were any better with genjutsu, maybe he would try to weave this very same pain in an illusion, but as things stood now, he didn't get much time to think about how he would even go about it. Sasuke hadn't spent that much time training his illusion skills with Jiraiya, as his teacher readily admitted he wasn't all that great with them in the first place. He crashed into Rashi again, his drawn sword halting against the rock that encased his midsection. Sasuke grunted, and pushed him away. His blood was starting to thunder, and he could feel the biju inside his gut begin to stir. A shrill sound. There ain't anything like a good scrap, is there, boy? Rashi cackled. He was likely feeling the same excitation. The man slammed his hands together and 4 pillars of lava erupted around them, covering the entire area in liquid fire. Rashi stood above it, as though it were nothing but water, volcanic rock shaping like an armor around him. Let's have a go at it again, Leaf Boy. He screamed. The lava answered his will, shooting in jets towards Sasuke. He dashed in, rather than back, trusting his eyes to keep him safe. Sasuke ran, blade covered in flaming wind chakra. Rashi grunted in exertion. The entire pool of lava rose around them. Rashi was trying to enclose them into a sphere of it. Sasuke may have the ability to take away the heat of it, but he'd rather not take a swim into actual lava, Jinchuriki, or not. Besides, focusing on not burning away in the lava would mean that he was open to other sorts of attacks. For the same reason, he didn't bother trying to escape it, as the sphere was already formed around him, anyway. He continued sprinting toward Rashi. Their eyes met, but he didn't bother with any Shari non-genjutsu. Time slowed. Rashi was wide open. Sasuke was, too. Who'd give up first? He knew he was faster than the lava was. He aimed toward Rashi's eyes, which were unprotected. Rashi realized that, and slammed his foot down, growling. The lava fell away and he dodged to his left, but that was not it. He had done something. Jaws made of flaming earth rose and snapped shut around Sasuke, dragging him under the lava. Ah, it had been a setup from the start. Rashi mused. He knew the attack would not be enough to get rid of the Uchiha. Maybe it would have worked against that girl from Taki, and even then, He wasn't so sure how tough she really was. There was probably more to her than what the intel said. Ah. There it comes. Chakra built up in huge amounts down in the magma pit. There was a sound like screeching. The lava rose up, forming a dome, before bursting completely, throwing gouts of liquid fire all around them. Sasuke rose from it, covered with a beige chakra cloak, flaming sword held aloft. There were no other flames to be seen, which Rashi thought could be bad news. There were blue marks covering the Uchiha's skin, too. So we're done with the warm-up, eh? He chuckled. Rashi let his own chakra loose. A red cloak bubbled into existence around him, just as rock mixed with magma to create another layer of armor. He felt two of his teeth change into long fangs, and he knew from experience his eyes had turned to blank orange. Just as the Uchiha's eyes seemed to shimmer between red and gold, in a superposition that was closer to orange than either color. Rashi dropped lower, not dropping on all fours fully, but not wanting to deal with the hassle of precise motions anymore. They faced each other, staring. No shinobi would want to stand anywhere near them. The heat was scorching. Let's see you get out of this one, boy. Rashi dashed, fist cocked back, his Biju's fury obvious on his face. He punched Sasuke's face with all his might, a shattering blow. His hand had been stopped. A wall of flame had sprung to existence between Rashi and his opponent, blocking his punch entirely. Sasuke's counterattack came right away, his sword coming down with violence, smashing into his volcanic armor, cracking it. Flames, that had weight. Rashi reared back, focusing chakra through his legs. Then more of it. And more. He charged forward, smashing his entire mass into the Uchiha. The flame shield didn't break, but they were both sent flying, the flames shimmering between them. Sasuke kicked him in the face. Several times. Rashi barely reacted, he was much stronger than the younger man, physically. The Uchiha managed to throw himself off in midair, hitting the lava floor with a grunt. He sent a burst of flames after him, obscuring his position. Rashi extended lava in a pillar around him, catching the Uchiha anyway. A fist smashed into his face, making him step back a bit. So the boy could pack a punch, then. He smashed his own fist back, feeling his knuckles reach through the flame shield, sending the Uchiha hurtling. Rashi gathered chakra, jumping into the air. He let loose a burst of pure lava from his mouth, aiming at melting the brat alive. The Uchiha smashed into the pit, instantly melting what was left of earth under it. A pillar of smoke rose. A single blade of cursed wind came out of it, cutting through his armor lightly. The wound immediately cauterized. That's it. Rashi guffawed. I had to see how fast your regeneration was. The Uchiha spoke for the first time since he had transformed, his voice lower, stronger. The short swim in the lava hadn't done him any favor, and his regeneration was the only thing holding his burned skin together. The smoke cleared entirely, and 3 copies of the Uchiha were standing next to him. Wind release, great breakthrough, 2 of them weaved. Fire release, great dragon fire, the rest of them finished. So he can still use jutsu in this form. Rashi thought. Both jutsu combined into a true wall of pale fire. Rashi channeled more rock in front of him. Even the reinforced rock melted away. He grunted, but his bubbling chakra cloak protected him. Flames won't cut it, boy. Time to admit I dash. The Uchiha reappeared behind him, sword extended, aiming for his heart. They kept you busy, didn't they? Sasuke shot back. Rashi deflected the blade with a rising punch. Then he grabbed the Uchiha's sword hand with his left, smashing his face with his right hand. The flame shield shimmered into place again. Sasuke waved his hand and 2 of the flames, sharpened. What? That was what they did, stabbing into both of the man's eyes. He screamed in raw anger, and released the Uchiha. Something slammed into Rashi's back. A sword, he realized. It hadn't managed to cut through, though. He thrashed blindly, and hit something that faded into flames. A clone, then. You're a crafty little bastard, aren't you? His only answer was a whirring sound, which reminded him of the previous war. Rashi's eyes reformed. He blinked, getting used to his vision returning. Then he blinked again. The Uchiha had created what looked to be a miniature sun and held it above his head. It radiated so much heat that the younger man's battle armor, that had mostly held until now, was melting. There was so much Biju chakra in it that Rashi actually felt somewhat worried. Rashi only noticed now that the orb was made out of whirling fire chakra, constantly spilling. He channeled lava chakra throughout his entire body, roaring. No. That won't cut it, he thought. Whatever the boy was preparing was packing a lot of power. Rashi drew even more chakra. If he had been able to transform entirely without losing control, he would have done so. Let's see which one is stronger, then. Your little sun or my lava pillar? The sun's color turned darker. Sasuke threw it, keeping his hand extended to guide it. Fire style, spiraling Sunday. The Uchiha called. Rashi roared, letting his chakra explode outward, shielding him. The orb came in contact with the pillar with a terrible sound. Gugh! Rashi groaned, pushing more against it. On the other side, the Uchiha was grunting too, straining to keep the orb advancing. But in terms of raw power, the Four Tails was in another class, compared to the One Tail. Rashi smiled a bloody grin. For once, he was happy to be carrying his burden. He grunted, pushing even more chakra out of his pores. He knew the Uchiha couldn't pull more, as he was already at his maximal output. Rashi wasn't. He howled in pure fury, the pillar growing larger and larger, the outside of it closer to fire than actual lava. He'd show the young upstart what being a Jinchuriki truly meant. The orb started to be pushed back, and he grinned. The Uchiha winced, and Rashi tasted victory. Then the young man smiled. Yes. There was no doubt. He was smiling. Finally. What? Rashi howled. How? The orb seemed to slip in and it crashed into him, forcing him out of the pillar. He had expanded too much chakra in the last jutsu, and could feel himself burning, if slower than he should have, if he had been anybody else. Most of his chakra cloak was consumed, mitigating the damage. You overextended. The Uchiha called, letting the Biju chakra fade. He let out a long breath. You focused the lava chakra in your immediate vicinity, at first. When you went for more, what was left around you was closer to flames. Fire chakra. Enough for me to weaken it. He lifted his eyes, as Rashi was dragged away by the spinning orb entirely. This was no normal Sharingan, he knew as much. My eyes allow me to control flames. Their heat and their density. He chuckled. That means your fires, as well. This isn't over, Uchiha Sasuke. The orb carried him away, far away from where they had fought. There, in the sky, it exploded, a raging inferno. Sasuke's sharp eyes saw Rashi's form crash down from the sky. He wasn't sure whether he was alive or not, and for a moment, he considered going there to finish him. He hesitated. No, his team was fighting. Their lives were more important. He started running again, despite the state of exhaustion he was in. That fire Raisnon had taken a lot out of him. Forming it, pushing it to its most destructive form, keeping it stable and then throwing it and holding it together, splitting Rashi's flames apart. It had taken all of his skill, as well as both eyes' power. He couldn't remember the last time he had been so hard-pressed. Sasuke sat down, recovering as much as he could. Well. He chuckled to himself. It worked. Rashi crashed down to the floor. He coughed, spitting out bloody saliva to the ground. He had managed to survive, thanks to his Biju's chakra. He took the moment to reflect. Then he stood up, staring out somewhere in the horizon. He let out a primal scream of rage. Then he fell back on his ass, entirely spent. The Uchiha could wait, he had no more strength today. He heard footsteps close to him and whirled around. How the hell had they sneaked up on him? There were two men. One had long black hair, and the typical Hyuga eyes. The other was shorter, and wore an orange mask. Behind it, he could see a Sharingan spinning. Ah, come the fuck on. Can't a man catch a break? Close by, Anko cursed and backed away. She had come herself to speak with Kaed, who was keeping track of Uchiha Sasuke's whereabouts. Instead, she had found much more. Too much for her, in fact. Toby was stronger than her, she had had the time to realize that since last time's fight. And there was Niji, too. The Hyuga had likely seen her, too, but for some reason, he had said nothing of it to his companion. There was nothing she could do here, short of killing the Four Tails Jinhuriki to prevent Akatsuki from getting the beast out. And die afterwards, likely. She would keep an eye on the Uchiha from afar. They had a Hyuga with them too instead. That was the best she could do now. At the same time, it was still night in Kumo. After yet another enjoyable session of lightning therapy, the Kumo ninja had moved on to Genjutsu. Naruto had mostly lost track of the days, anyway. For hours on end, Naruto had the distinct pleasure of being submitted to whatever mind-breaking jutsu the two torturers could come up with. They had asked for many different things. His role in the Hokage's murder, and Darui's, at first. Then they moved on to other things. What the seals over his body were for, what he and Orochimaru were really planning. He had said nothing. And he wasn't going to. He still wasn't sure what the Raikage had in mind for him, even now. Taking the 9 tails for Kumo, since he knew about that? He seemed like the type. Nobody had asked him anything about the 9 tails, though. And what was the point of the torture, here? Did they have no reliable extraction method? By now, he knew that the masked man had the Raikage under a genjutsu. But if this were the case, why wasn't he already in an Akatsuki holding cell? Was the man simply too stubborn? The Raikage's actions were erratic. What was happening? If this really was a genjutsu, what was it making the man do, exactly? Was the man fighting back, or was the Akatsuki busy with something else, that took precedence over getting his little piece of the 9 tails? Or was someone on their way, someone that simply wasn't as quick as Toby was? This was definitely worrying. And he tried, as he had done so many times already, to push his worry for Karen, Sakura, and Ino away. And Yujito, too. How far under Toby's spell was the Raikage already? Would he sacrifice his own? He would need to get out of here. Quickly. He wasn't sure how much time he had spent here already, but it had been too long already. How could he do that, though? This time, he had no access to his chakra at all. The only thing he could feel calling to him was the Tengu seal, begging for a full awakening. But he had the feeling that this wasn't going to be something he could just do without any consequences. 2 hours. He would meditate on it for the next 2 hours. Then, if he couldn't find any other option, he would do it, consequences be damned. The door creaked open. Naruto's head jolted up. Come back for more. He grunted out, voice hoarse. I've got a bit of time to spare and I'm really starting to enjoy our sessions together. The guard was coming toward him, but froze. His eyes roamed over him, a horrified expression over his face. What's this about? The man shook his head, steeling himself for whichever brand of fuckery they were about to pull out on him. The guard came close to him. Naruto stared. I've prepared an escape route for us. The guard said. Go through the eastern gate and go south after that. Naruto blinked. A trap? You're Dash. Of course it's me, you fool. Ino said, from behind the guard's face, with set eyes. Who else would want to risk so much for someone so stiff anyway? Chapter 73, Dawnbreaker. So, it's really you, then? Naruto asked, rubbing his sore wrists, once he had gotten down. Yes. She said. I'm sorry I couldn't manage to come in earlier. What are you saying? Naruto gave her a tired grin. You have no idea how grateful I am that you came at all. She took him into her arms, which definitely felt weird, considering she was using the body of some Kumo guy he didn't even know. He grunted. She realized and let go of him. Ino gave him a wobbly smile. It was difficult, honestly. How did you get in the first place? She sighed. A very long chain of possession techniques. He gave her a curious look. She continued. We had some insider knowledge of how Kumo's barrier team worked. Ino said. Orochimaru, of course. They have sensors constantly on the lookout for non-registered chakra inside the village's perimeter, and further away, too. And the barriers are good, too, so that's where most of the security effort goes. Which meant I had to make my chakra, and the link to my body, too, invisible. Naruto nodded. I started from far away, with animals, and slowly switched bodies until I got here. It still took me the better part of a day. Ino paused, blinking. Wait, it's night now, right? Sorry, my mind is a bit confused by now. Karen and Sakura are watching over my body, as we speak, feeding my real body enough chakra to keep the link open even at this distance. Well, mostly Karen. That's pretty amazing. Naruto breathed out. He hadn't even known this was possible in the first place. We had to work out the specifics, yeah. Do you know how difficult it is to combine the mind arts with the sealing arts? Ino asked. It had taken some complicated designs Ino didn't really understand at all, among other things. Naruto chuckled. Yeah, I can only imagine. Ah, yes. Can you help me remove these seals? He asked, pointing at the binding seals that had been applied upon his back, where he could not reach on his own. Smart move from Kumo, he had to admit. Ino froze. There's a small problem, I can't use any chakra right now. Only the possession technique, and a shoddy memory wipe when switching. That was the limit. We bound the rest away to avoid detection and save on chakra, too. And that's how I got in. Ah. Naruto winced. The jutsu is going to break soon, too, I can feel it. Ino muttered. So we're going to have to prepare your escape. Ino took a closer look at Naruto. For someone who had spent close to a week in Kumo's tender care, he seemed normal. Too normal, in fact. Something here was wrong, Ninetales healing his body and mind or not. While Konoha had some regulations concerning prisoners' treatment, well, no, Danzo was in power now, so that was likely to change. Kumo had no big rules when it came to that. IWA was even worse, according to rumors. If the Rockheads get you, death will be a relief, girl. Her aunt had told her, getting into too much detail, years ago. Besides his raw voice, a sign that he had been screaming a lot, he looked as though nothing had happened at all. Even now, Ino knew she had not recovered fully, when it came to the mental trauma that had followed her stay in Konoha's cells. So sure, he could be hiding it, but from what she could feel of his thoughts, almost nothing of the torture was on his mind. Well. She amended herself. Maybe he was just very goal-focused right now, and he would only feel the effects later. Maybe. But that was just the mind part. Looking at him, it was no wonder something about his body had seemed strange. She could see it, even now, after a week of eating next to nothing. The way his body almost seemed to stay within the realm of plausibility, but instinct told her that muscle when it wasn't trained for show just wasn't supposed to look so dense. Not in humans. And even now, he looked the exact same as he did when he was eating enough food for 3 people, already fading wounds notwithstanding. Whatever it was that he had done to himself by carving runes into himself had changed more than just his body. When he had found her in Konoha, she had been close to unresponsive. On the other hand, right now, Naruto had an almost uncaring look on his face. He was just thinking about how to escape. She had been wrong. He had changed. And either he had never realized the change was happening at all, which she didn't believe for 1 second. Naruto was way too observant for that. Or he didn't care. Not anymore. Kumo's detection system was a marvel. A mix of technology, chakra sensing and sealing arts, it allowed the village to track any noteworthy form of chakra within a huge range, spanning further than the village itself. Prisoners were registered into the system, and as such, the moment their chakra was detected outside of where they were supposed to be, rotting in a cell, the nearest Kumo shinobi would be notified of it. But the prison's security was tight, with only one real way out, anyway. Again, the system was a marvel. Which meant they relied too much on it. And somebody willing to bind their chakra entirely could theoretically slip in or out. So tell me, Ino. Naruto asked, as she helped put him back in a position that would look as though he were detained. but that would allow him to break free easily. Yes. What happened while I was asleep? He asked, not expecting much. She froze. Damn. It's true, you haven't heard. IWA has joined the war. Ah. Fuck. That about summed it up. Yeah. Against Konoha and Kumo, I guess. He was just making sure. Yeah. They still have some trade agreements with Suna, too, so. I guess you could call both of them allies. I guess it's the start of a great war again. I would say so. Ino muttered. They said nothing for a while. The jutsu will break soon. Ino winced. I see. I'm sorry I couldn't bring you any sort of weapon. They're forbidden down there, and I couldn't sneak anything in. I'll manage. He chuckled. Probably. Do you remember where to go? You've only told me 3 times, by now. She hesitated. Then I'll see you there. Only you. Sneaking a single person so close to Kumo is going to be bad enough. She chuckled. All right. And Ino. He started. Yes. Be careful, please. She touched his cheek lightly. When have I not been? He could think of a few examples, but let it go. Ino had left before the jutsu broke entirely. He knew that the next time he'd see the guard she had possessed, the man would not have any memories of this. She had tried describing what the seals on his back looked like, but she was pretty bad at the sealing arts, and they didn't have much time anyway, so he was pretty much screwed when it came to undoing them. Well, if Kumo relied on chakra sensing as much as she had said, maybe this was a blessing in disguise. She had told him there were not that many guards around the prison, since it was late at night. Kumo was that confident in their holding system. Well, no wonder. Without a little help from the inside, there was almost no way of getting out. And considering how serious Kumo took traitors, and as a result, how loyal their forces tended to be, there was no reason for them not to feel safe. Naruto rubbed his sore wrists, stretched his limbs. He waited. If his intuition was right, someone would come to wake him up soon enough. Sleep deprivation was pretty effective in getting someone to break, and it had been more than an hour and a half since the last time the guy had come. The door slammed open. The time had come, then. Naruto kept his hands above his head, pretending to still be shackled. The man chuckled. He then threw ice-cold water at him. Wakey wakey. The freezing water ran down Naruto's body, and he held back a shiver. He kept his eyes closed. I said wake up. The man threw more water at him. Naruto muttered something rude in answer. What was that? The guard asked, delighted. There was his opportunity to blow off some steam. Naruto muttered something rude, involving a pack of dogs and his mother. The man blinked, before turning both angry and excited. He came closer. I think. I didn't get to hear what you said. Care to repeat? He chuckled, putting his face close to Naruto's. His purple eyes snapped open, startling the man. Naruto's hands flashed, fast even without his chakra. He grabbed his head and twisted. Hard. The man barely had time to let out a single noise. Naruto looked down at the corpse, unsure what he was supposed to feel. This guy had been particularly cruel, needlessly so, even for a torturer the few times he had encountered him. He had killed a prisoner on Naruto's 3rd day here. Takagi, from Kiri. He had dragged a woman away, never to be seen again. No name. Well. Naruto had meant it. Some people needed to go. There probably wouldn't be anyone to miss him, anyway. It was surprisingly easy, too easy in fact, to justify this sort of cold-blooded murder as necessary. He would have to be careful. He pushed the corpse to a dark corner of a cell, before figuring there was a better way. He took the man's clothes, loose enough to fit him, and dressed the corpse with his own rags. Then he shackled the guy's wrists, the way he himself had been positioned before. He checked the pockets, and unfortunately, there was nothing of use there, besides bandages, as Ino had said. Nothing really sharp. And she had also said something more worrying. They only opened the doors to the building after thoroughly checking the identity of the person who was entering or leaving. Alright. How to do this? His first idea had been to free the other prisoners and cause some sort of riot. He dismissed it quickly. 20 unarmed, weakened ninja who didn't even have access to their chakra, against one of the strongest villages? Yeah, no, this would never work. He would free them if he could, but they were on their own after that. If the timings were the same as usual, he would have a bit of time before anybody else came. He would use this respite to plan and get out. After checking the other cells and realizing there was nobody else on this floor at the moment, Naruto realized he had to continue. There was a sink, with no mirror. He used it to clean himself quickly, face and hands. The rest were hidden behind the Kumo uniform anyway. Hopefully he didn't smell too bad. He knew his hair was so grimy it looked mousy brown again. He considered the bandages, and wrapped his hair the same way Yujito had done hers, which took him a few tries, and a whole lot of effort. Then he wrapped the bandages around his face loosely, hiding his whiskers. Then he went down the stairs at the end of the corridor, silently. There were footsteps coming, so he flattened himself against the wall, hoping his scent didn't carry that far. He crouched in the shadows. A man passed by, whistling. Naruto bent over, and saw there was a chair and a desk at the end of the corridor, facing the length of it. If that guy sits there, I'm done. Before he could think it through, he started walking along the corridor, making no sound as he went. He didn't dare turn around, because it felt as though if he hesitated a single second, he would get caught. Naruto almost froze. There was a man behind one of the cell's bars, staring at him with lucid blue eyes. He swallowed a curse. If that guy said anything at all. The man looked at him straight on. Naruto stared back, still walking. It was obvious that he was trying to sneak out, anybody who saw him like this could tell. Something like understanding passed between them. The man retreated in his cell, an amused grin stretching his dry lips. Naruto's heart started beating again. He disappeared in the staircase just as the guard sat down at his desk. There was no time to rest. He went down several floors, without meeting anybody. Then it hit him. He knew exactly how to get out here. He had already done it once, after all. Why had he tried so hard to make up a convoluted plan on the spot? And how did Kumo dispose of corpses, again? The next floor was full of people. Some eating, some chatting. There would be no avoiding them. But he had something working in his favor. He had seen these people before. And if they had seen him coming in, they probably saw a blonde man being dragged off by a guard or two. The Raikage would not bother coming here by himself, likely. Again, he had enough smeared blood through his hair that it looked brown, if they didn't bother looking too close. God, if Ino ever learned how brazen this was going to be, she would kill him. He could almost hear it. I went through all this trouble, and you pull this sort of stunt. He couldn't blame her. Well, if this didn't work, he had one last bluff up his sleeve. He reminded himself that he knew a whole lot more about them than they did about him. Then he practiced his Kumo accent, muttering to himself. They had an accent, despite what Yujito kept insisting on. Naruto steeled himself. Then he walked into the room, looking as if he belonged here. A few conversations stopped, and he felt several pairs of eyes set on him. He ignored them. Just like he ignored the voice in the back of his head, the one that told him this was going to be the dumbest mistake he had ever made in his short life. Naruto walked with purpose, face thunderous. He went to the first person he could see, and asked him, loud enough to be heard by about half of them, "You tell me, who the hell killed that Suna bastard?" Naruto thought he sounded pretty convincing. "Which one?" somebody asked, sounding bored. "You know exactly the one." Naruto shot back. Someone else answered, "I think Warui did, my man." Good. This man, Warui, he knew already. He could bluff his way through this and find where they put the corpses. The first man he had asked groaned. "What, for real? Again? Well, tell this Warui that this shit won't fly." Naruto roared. "The fuck, man? Why are you yelling at me?" Say this shit to him yourself. He shot back. I would, if he was around. I've been looking for a while now. He pretended to calm down some. But you're right. It's not on you, my man. When will he come in? 7. Somebody told him, cutting through the tension. But, he tends to come closer to 9, really. Naruto let out a long-suffering sigh. That's hours away. You guys know where the body's stashed now. Why do you even care that much? The first guy asked, suspicious. He was pretty sure he had never seen him around. Sure, there were lots of shinobi he didn't know here, and the prison was a pretty big complex overall, but he had been working here for a while, and this guy was pretty noticeable. Look. Sorry. What's your name? Naruto asked, and the man answered. Sorry, Mendo I lost my temper here. It's just. He scratched his head. I helped bring this guy in and he had some precious intel. To hear he was killed like that. Just bring him to the forensics. A man grunted. They probably won't be able to do much, this bunch of lazy corpse fiddlers, but who knows, eh? Maybe they'll earn their wages, for once. Yeah. Naruto sighed again. That's my best bet, I guess. Corpses on the lower floor. He hazarded a guess. No, still on this one, lower one's full. Pretty terrible implication there. Suzuru's watching over the room today, I think. Ask him. But be quick about it, I think Taro and Sakuma wanted to throw the stiff in the Yubari. Something about the dune dwellers not even deserving to be burned. Can't say I disagree. The man chuckled lowly. Naruto tried to guess what the Yubari was. The river flowing down the mountain, he was pretty sure. This might be even better than expected. I see. I'll have to get there before they do, then. Wouldn't want the intel to spill down a river. The man nodded, which confirmed what he had thought. Better go now, they won't want to waste any time. Naruto nodded, giving them short thanks. To the first man. Sorry again. He said, turning to leave. Just fucking go. Mendo said, feeling tense. Naruto let out a long shuddering breath once he was outside. His hands were shaking. But he couldn't afford to be seen like that. He hurried toward the makeshift morgue, only giving terse nods to the guys he passed on the way. This could work. He would have settled for going through an incinerator, provided the chimney was large enough to climb out of, if there even was one dash, or being buried in a mass grave. He was strong enough to crawl his way out of that, he knew. But throwing the body in the river, then? That was perfect. A man was guarding the entrance of what could only be the morgue. Suzuru, then. No one else was around right now. Naruto improvised, channeling his inner Orochimaru, faking emotion once more. Well, no. Orochimaru would call this whole plan a harebrained scheme. Suzuru-san. There you are. He said, in fake relief, sprinkled with some tired frustration. Huh. Dode-sama was looking for you. Naruto said, falling back on the name of somebody important he had overheard during a particularly lengthy session of torture. What, really? The man looked nervous. That was a good sign. Yes. And he looked pretty mad about it, too. He sent me here to tell you to get there immediately. The man cursed. Fuck. Do you know what this is about? No idea. But I think you'd better hurry. I'll cover for you in the meantime. The man hesitated. He told you to do so. Yeah. Naruto nodded. And he also told me to relay this message to you. What is it? I'll demote this lazy fucker down from the morgue to the sewers if I have to. Naruto shrugged. Suzuru cursed again, and left running down the stairs. So the exit was even further down, then? Well, he wasn't going there anyway. He entered the morgue, made sure no one was around once more, and located the corpse of the Suna ninja. He was already wrapped inside a thick sack, so he had to waddle through several of those that were crudely marked as Suna to find him. He removed the corpse from the sack, bundled it with a smaller one that he'd rather not dwell on too much and took his place. He went in, head first, closing the bag from the inside. Naruto waited, trying to keep his beating heart under control and his breathing silent. "Goddamn!" Sakuma groaned, picking the Suna ninja's corpse and throwing it over his shoulder. His knees almost gave out on him, and he had to use his chakra to stay up. "What is it?" Taro asked in confusion, the corpse of a Kiri woman slung over his back like a sack of potatoes. "What the fuck do these Suna guys eat? This guy heavy. Man, you have no idea." He grunted. "I didn't even know people in Suna had regular access to food." They started walking down the stairs and toward the exit. The guards at the entrance confirmed their identities, and they went out of the building. They passed Suzuru on the way, who was rushing back in, looking worried. Taro laughed, "This guy seems terrified. What do you think happened?" "That's Suzuru. Probably got caught fucking corpses." Sakuma grunted. "Wouldn't surprise me from this dumb bastard." They carried the corpses through the northern gate. There, at the edge of the cliff, they set both of them down. They took the woman by her hands and feet, and swung her back and forth, before letting her go with a chakra-enhanced throw. She fell into the rapids and disappeared there, going to the east. Maybe the currents were strong enough to carry her close to the land of water. It would serve these assholes well. She had been someone important in life, apparently. They bent down again. "Holy shit, you weren't kidding. Fucker's made of stone." "Told ya. Can't blame him. I'd eat lead myself, if I was born in this god-forsaken desert." Sakuma grunted. Back. And forth. Back. There it went. It had almost hit the cliff, because the guy was too damn heavy. Still, the Suna ninja's corpse fell into the cold waters down below. Already, they could see it being carried off. Sakuma threw the stiff a last mock salute. "All right," Taro said. "Let's get back to the actual work." Sakuma grunted in answer, both corpses already forgotten. Chapter 74, Morningstar. It turned out that Toru and Hanabi made for a decent team, surprisingly. Her taijutsu was swift and devastating, which made any diversions he could provide with his genjutsu deadly. He himself was no slouch in close-quarter combat, and with the Sharingan's ability, it was easy for him to weave through her strikes, which led to more than a few enemies to get hit by a gentle fist strike they had not even seen coming. And the fact that her eyes cut through all of his area-affecting genjutsu meant that he could fight without feeling restrained. That meant that the two of them fought away from the rest of their platoon, which had the added bonus of splitting the Suna and IWA forces in two. Toru's thrown kunao found its way into the eye of a Suna ninja, just as Hanabi killed a woman from IWA with a strike to the heart. "You're pretty good." He smiled darkly, her back pressed against his, as they spun in a deadly dance. "Shut it." Hanabi shot back, keeping track of the growing number of ninja coming toward them. They wouldn't be able to go on like this, and she relayed the information to Toru. "All right," he said. "I can do something about that. How is our platoon faring?" "They're doing well, now. Suna is backing away, there. IWA, as well." "Good." Toru cast a fire jutsu, obscuring the enemy's view of them. "And theirs, as well, but their eyes could see things beyond that." "Duck," Hanabi called sharply. Toru hit the deck, taking her word for it. The air palm smashed into a Suna ninja's throat, leaving him to choke on the ground. Toru nodded to her in thanks. He had seen him coming, but was still glad for the help. His blade plunged through the man's throat, granting him a quick death, at least. Toru moved, projecting the illusion that he was going left around him. At the same time, he tricked one unsuspecting woman into believing she had managed to kill the Hyuga with a crushing blow to the forehead. Hopefully they wouldn't stop for a dead branch Hyuga with ruined eyes. Instead of doing just that, he stepped back, taking cover behind a wall. Hanabi did just that, as well. The moment after, an IWA ninja's earth jutsu collapsed the whole area he had been standing on. Toru weaved a suggestion, staring into the eyes of a man who had known where he really was. One of Iwa's earth sensors, then. He relayed inaccurate information to his commander, which he relayed in turn. The IWA ninja went away in the wrong direction. He, Hanabi and the other survivors waited. And waited a bit longer. Toru let out a long sigh. Only Konoha was left. Why aren't we going after them? Hanabi asked harshly. The back of their formation is unprotected. And then what? Toru muttered. There are way too many of them, and not so many of us anymore. He motioned to all the dead Konoha ninja, who lay around the area. Still, we should do something. She insisted. Toru sighed. This was why he hated dealing with people who just arrived at the front. This is not a good idea. He said simply. Our goal is not extermination, it is to defend this position. And killing them would accomplish just that. It would also accomplish killing the last 15 of us. He retorted, trying to keep his annoyance out of his tone. Your dash. Tell me where they're going. He said, staring at her with his single eye. She held back a shiver. It was strange, seeing this man, who she had always seen as an unreliable fool, look so serious. So she listened, activating her Byakugan. They're headed to the fortress the Suna ninja used to occupy before the first Konoha platoon came and firebombed them. 3 kilometers to the west. Toru nodded. They probably intended to occupy it themselves. Well, Konoha would show them why this was a bad idea. What of Suna? The IWA platoon leader is talking to the Suna woman who led the Suna troops since their commander fell. Of course. He muttered. Toru stood up. Where are you going? Hanabi asked. Well, we can't exactly let them have the fortress, can we now? He just asked. But you said dash. Toru faced his platoon and started speaking, his voice carrying easily to the troops. All right. IWA is headed toward Bansai Fortress. If they take it, it's going to be a pain in the ass to kick them out. They're not as flammable as Suna was, in the same position, let's say. A few scattered laughs. And we don't want Suna to retake it either, do we? They stomped their feet. No. Toru nodded. That's what I thought. So let's regroup. We're going to take the fortress ourselves, kick IWA back to their neutral country, and continue our push through wind. Sounds good. Yes. Damn, I could be home, having a fun date if it weren't for meddling old men. Toru thought. Suzuki came to their camp soon after, his clothes torn. Toru whistled. Show off. You never miss a single opportunity to show some chest, do you? Suzuki gave him a blank look. That's something you would do. You wound me, cousin. Suzuki gave him a tired smile. Is the IWA Jinchuriki alive? Toru asked. Yeah, I'd say so. That old man was too tough to die after a fire raised on, I'd say. I came back as soon as I could. Too late, though. Toru gave him a strange look. Even after a fire raised on? How? Is that guy built out of reinforced diamond or something? Suzuki snorted. Did you hear from Shisui? Toru asked, tone hesitant. Ever since we got split. No. Suzuki shook his head. I haven't. Anybody else? Suzuki thought about it. Kyoko, Tetsuya, and Masato Yoshikawa, not Ishida, are dead. He said bluntly. Toru winced, saying nothing. Kaji, too. He ended up saying. Ah. I see. It's. Yeah. So fucking pointless, all of it. Isn't it? Toru asked, not really looking for an answer. Yeah. Suzuki nodded. I'm not sure what's the end goal here, either. And with IWA thrown in the mix, too. They had sent a messenger bird as early as they could, of course. It feels like the world's ripping at the seams. Toru said, his lone eye dark. They said nothing for a while. They knew each other well enough not to need more words to express what they felt. Toru snorted suddenly, breaking the tense atmosphere. What is it? Suzuki asked, now curious. Remember that time, back when we were kids, we stole from Shisui's money jar? He said through his chuckles. Suzuki did. A guilty smile stretched over his lips. Yeah. We blew it all on candy. It had been before they had graduated the academy and neither Suzuki's parents nor Toru's aunt had wanted to give them any money for it. The last straw had been Shisui taunting them about it, so of course, they had ended up going through his wallet. After eating enough candy to get themselves sick, they walked around Konoha's shopping district, people watching and window shopping. They had made stories about the people passing by, creating little narratives about their lives. The people who looked angry, those who tried too hard. After that, they went looking for drawing supplies for Toru. Of course, Shisui had found them easily, and had been somewhat unamused. Seeing their now guilty faces, neither could remember if they actually felt guilty at the time, though he had ended up buying the supplies himself, and a few tomatoes for Suzuki. Rewarding bad behavior, he had called it. It had become a fond memory, by now. Both of them turned at the same time. Someone was running at them. It was Hanabi, who looked scared. "There is something falling down on us," she screamed. "Right now." Both of them looked toward the sky. She had been right, a large white thing was silently coming straight at them. "How much chakra is packed into this shit?" Toru asked. "If he could see it from this distance. If it is what I think it is. Too much to run now," Suzuki said. "Gather the people, now." Just a few moments later, two things happened. A pink spectral shroud flashed around them. And the world exploded. "Your art is not so bad, for Asuna Kunoichi, yeah?" Deidara nodded in appreciation. In IWA, they rarely got to enjoy such fine things, so this war was a dream come true for him. Finally, an opportunity to practice. "It would cost you nothing to keep your thoughts to yourself," his companion said. She was a woman with dark green hair with orange tips tied up in a bun. "But yes, it makes for a strong combination," Pakura admitted. "Indeed." Deidara nodded, grinning. "By the way, what are you doing, Lahuoa?" He threw his bird to the right, doing a barrel roll to avoid the pillar of flame that suddenly rose from the earth. Deidara chuckled. "So this is not going to be as boring as expected, yeah? Focus on the objective, please." Pakura grunted. "I can do both easily." Pieces of desiccated clay rained down from the sky. They seemed to rumble, before shifting into humanoid figures. Suzuki's large, tanuki-shaped Susanoo faded away, until only pink wisps of chakra remained. Kazuki and Sadao were about to attack when Suzuki held a hand up. "Don't," he said. "They're made of the same explosive material. Leave this to us, there's a fortress to take. Sadao will take the lead of the platoon." "Yes, sir." He nodded. "You've heard him, men, women." Toru moved close, unsheathing his Wakaizushi again. "That includes you, Hanabi," he said, addressing the Hyuga who was definitely not moving. "What?" she shot back. "I'm more than dash." "Get out of here," Toru said, looking at her seriously. "This is out of your league and I won't have you die for nothing. Don't dash. You're going to kill us all, if you stay here," he said, not even looking at her. She screamed something. Suzuki cut her off by erecting a wall of flame between them. "Hanabi." Suzuki gave Hinata's sister a long look. "Go with our men. The objective comes first. We'll handle these guys." With a last heated glare, she left with the troops. "Domestic trouble?" Pakura laughed, coming down to the earth on an orb of red flame. "Not exactly," Toru answered slowly. "It's just dash." He saw Suzuki move before he did, his eyes detonating the orb the Suna woman was standing on. They both moved as one person, weaving through the clay figures without touching them, never getting caught in the blast whenever Deidara detonated them. Suzuki's blade went high, blazing, and Toru's own went low, cutting the woman in 3 pieces. "It's a clone," Suzuki said, right before she detonated and he had to contain the strange flames she produced. He noticed they still dried his hand out, and so did Toru. "Yeah, I knew that already. So, which one do you want to take on?" Toru just grinned in answer. Uchiha Toru came out of the smoke first, leaping over a platform of flame Sasuke had likely created, reaching for the skies in a body flicker that left a remnant of flames behind him. Deidara had learned how to fight Uchiha from Oniki himself. Against this particular one, he knew he had to avoid looking at the eye, or the sword too much. Reaching for me directly, yeah. Deidara laughed, opening his arms wide, letting a dozen of clay birds fly free. Toru weaved hand seals, releasing a flurry of smaller flames in answer. Fire sty, scatter flame. The birds detonated in a plume of smoke. Deidara flew higher and Toru missed him entirely. Then he stopped in midair. Over a platform made out of solid flame. What? Deidara thought. He looked down, where he could see Uchiha Sasuke battling Pakura, his hand extended toward the skies. Shit, they're really used to fighting together, huh? Steel bit into his flesh and Deidara had to pull off a last-minute substitution, before detonating the clay he had switched with. Toru pushed off from it when he noticed, managing to avoid the worst of the explosion. How? He was too close to the blast, wasn't he? Scorch release, scorching wave. Pakura called the name of her technique, 3 orbs of red flame dancing around her like miniature suns. She had realized a few things during their short fight. Your eyes can't control my scorch release directly, can they? Uchiha Sasuke said nothing. It was obvious he was still reeling from a previous fight today. Maybe she'd get to kill the bastard who had stolen from Suna, then. And eyes that could apparently control fire or not, he was definitely not using the ability much right now. And your chakra is already running low. She smirked. He still said nothing, opting to run at her, his dark sword extended. She threw the orbs around him, forcing him to dance around them. She had him where she wanted. Sweating and sweating, until he'd be sucked dry. And finally. The heat is affecting you. You can't afford to summon more fire now, because you are already losing too much water. Pakura weaved hand signs. More orbs joined the previous ones. Uchiha Sasuke continued to weave around them, but it was a losing battle. It was clear to her he was all too used to fighting using his fire shield. This was what made her a terrible opponent for him. Yeah, that's true. He admitted. You're trying to mummify me, aren't you? There's no trying here, I can assure you. She said, amused, making sure not to meet his eyes. The moment you use fire, you're a dead man, Jinchuriki, or not. I see. Still, she could see chakra pooling through his dark blade. He apparently didn't believe her. Don't say I didn't warn you. She laughed, adding more chakra to her jutsu. The heat became unbearable, even to her. She could see the Uchiha looking weary, too. He mumbled something. What was that? She asked. Is your throat getting dry, maybe? I said. Uchiha Sasuke repeated, forcing her eyes to stay on the sword. She was transfixed. Something was wrong with her, she could feel it. The orbs escaped her control, dissipating into the air. How was he doing this? That it's lucky I'm not really that fond of using fire style, then, huh? The first illusion fell away, revealing a battle-worn Uchiha Toru. What? His katana was replaced by a Wakaizushi, too. Pakura still couldn't move, and he forced her to meet his eye. You really talk too much. He paused. Well, me too. The blade struck, piercing through her skull in a direct hit. Genjutsu sure feels anticlimactic. Toru muttered over her dead body. I really should have focused on something flashier. Still, he closed her eyes before sealing her away. Maybe there was something they could learn from her corpse, as unpleasant as the idea still was. Ah shit. Deidara muttered, flying high up in the sky again to avoid the pillar of flame Sasuke had summoned once their deception was revealed. How had the Suna Kunoichi managed to get herself killed so quickly? Wasn't that other Uchiha guy supposed to be mid-jonin level at best? If he had to deal with the Jinchuriki and another Uchiha whose actual skill level was unknown. Well, maybe he could pull it off, he wasn't one of Iwa's best and brightest for nothing. But he'd really prefer not to. There would be plenty of better opportunities to get rid of the Uchiha than a 2-on-1 battle. He rolled away again, narrowly missing getting by the Uchiha, who seemed to have turned himself into a fiery comet of sorts. In the background, he could see the IWA and Suna troops pulling away from Bansai Fortress. Yeah, no fuck that, he was not going against an entire platoon. He could likely try dropping a bomb, but he didn't think either of the Uchiha were going to let him pull out anything that might actually do some real damage. And there was this pink shield thing, anyway. He'd come back with the demolition corps to destroy the fortress the Leaf Ninja had apparently taken over. The old Tsuchikage would understand. Maybe. Sasuke and Toru headed to the fortress next, once they were certain Deidara was not about to bomb anything else today. Man, this trick works all the time. Toru chuckled. It was not the first time they switched during a battle, and it had come in handy before. Sasuke smiled lightly, now truly spent. He would crash down once this was over, he was sure of it. Let's not rely on it too much, he said. If the word gets out, there won't be much of a point to it anymore. Sure, sure. Toru waved off. You're just mad you couldn't get your own opponent. Mad? Me? Sasuke asked. I don't care if the guy fled, it's just less trouble. I don't care at all, I'm Uchiha Sasuke and I'm so fucking cool. Toru mimicked, in a baritone voice. I don't talk like that. Sasuke said hotly. I don't talk like Tha. Toru ducked to avoid a weak fireball. You guys, already took the castle? Toru blinked. Sadeo answered, grim pride in his voice. We did, with minimal trouble, too. Suna and IWA are backing away entirely, Hyuga Hanabi confirmed there was no trickery here. Nobody died, but Sabaru's leg got injured, Key dash. Come with me. Sasuke interrupted. He needed to sit. You can give me the full debrief over something warm to drink. It had been a long, long day. Sadeo accepted easily, grateful for the chance to sit down for a bit. Toru went to sit down in between Eiji and a shell-shocked Katsuro. He wrapped an arm around the man's shoulders, not saying much. Ah. He noticed Hanabi sitting in a corner alone. He would have gone to apologize right away, but the glare she was sending him dissuaded him. Yeah, she probably hadn't liked being dismissed like that too much. Tomorrow, then. In the fortress, shortly after, while the rest of the Konoha troops celebrated their victory, Hanabi stiffened. Not because of the woman she had seen, camping alone in the forest. Whoever she was staying away from them. There was something else. A few kilometers away, someone, who she had only noticed now, was staring at her, his Byakugan active, with a casual expression. That was Niji, no doubt. She stood up abruptly. Something wrong? Sasuke asked, tone deceptively light. He looked like he needed to sleep for 3 days. No. She walked away from the festivities. I need some fresh air, that's all. Don't worry about me. Toru's eye was on her, unreadable. A bit earlier. The Four Tails Jinchuriki was done for. Toby slung him over his shoulder, waiting for Niji to come closer so that he could warp them to rain. Niji, who was strangely silent. What are you waiting for, exactly? Toby asked, his voice low. There's something I need to do. He just said in answer. Toby gave him a hard look. We already have the Four Tails. Don't try anything with the One Tail now. Our whole plan is going to become much more complicated to execute if we can't blame Konoha for this one disappearing. Don't worry about it, I won't approach him at all. Niji retorted. Toby stared a bit longer, before disappearing entirely with their target in tow. Niji started walking closer to the fortress, until he was sure he was within Hanabi's range. He stood there waiting, staring at her. There. She noticed him. As he had expected, Hanabi was now running toward him at full speed, anger obvious on her face. Alone. Niji chuckled to himself. No, I don't think the Uchiha will even notice I was here at all. Chapter 75, Twisted Horizon. Niji. Hanabi called. She was almost shouting already. He hadn't changed all that much in the years since he had left Konoha. He was taller and broader, sure, but his face, his expressions. They were the exact same as before, except for something she could not put her finger on. Hanabi. Niji nodded politely. There would be no politeness, no Hanabi-sama, of course. He had left Konoha for reasons that were very clear to anybody who knew him. And besides, his departure had put her into his former position. What are you doing here? She asked, feeling the tension within her belly grow. Isn't this obvious to you? He asked casually. I came here to talk to you. You, what now? Hanabi tried to keep hold of her rising fury, she really did. You have some fucking nerve to show your face here. Why is that? Because of what you did. Leaving Konoha. Niji scoffed. Oh please, I'm sure you understand exactly why I did that. He pointed at her forehead, where hidden behind her headband, lay the Hyaga's cursed seal. Fuck you. She roared. Why do you think I got it in the first place? And Hanabi had noticed right away that his own forehead was bare, of course. How could she not? I wouldn't know about that. Niji chuckled. Being born in the wrong position. I assume. That was too much. Hearing Niji, a leaf trader who was directly or indirectly, that tended to depend on her mood, admittedly responsible for her plight, be so sarcastic about the whole ordeal was simply too much. Hanabi attacked. She was good, equally talented as Hinata was, with less hesitation when it actually came to striking hard and fast. Niji was better. And always had been, really. He deflected the strike aimed at his heart with an almost casual move, and then closed 3 tenketsu in her right arm, including the largest one, located in her shoulder. In the same movement, he grabbed her, and before she even understood what he had done, or how he had done it in the first place, she was laying on her back, gasping for air. I wasn't lying. Niji said evenly. I really came here to talk. Niji checked if they really were alone, just like he was sure Hanabi had done before coming. There was no one around, beside the forest animals, which included an impressive number of sparrows. Good. The last thing he needed was Konoha interfering. Talk, then. Hanabi gritted out, humiliated. Niji held back a sigh. She had always been a prideful girl just like he had been, really, and he had hoped time would tone that down. Maybe showing her the widened difference in their skill levels had been the wrong way to go about it. He had hoped she could see how much being in the branch house held her back, but instead he had just made her angry, it seemed. Well, she probably knew it already, anyway. He cut right to the chase. Take this. Niji unfurled a scroll. She made no move to take it or even read it. He snorted. What is this? She asked, full of mistrust. A first step. I am not taking anything from you. Hanabi growled out. A scroll, even less so. He laughed. I assumed as much. Niji put the scroll down and stood up, not bothering to extend his hand to help her up, and then he got ready to leave. Niji turned to look at her one last time. He withheld a small smile. She was well, then. But I assume you will change your mind once you know what's inside. This got to her. He could see she seemed almost afraid of asking her next question, so he finished. Inside this scroll, you'll find the way to remove the main house's damnable seal. That's the way I was freed, after all. Niji disappeared. Long after Niji was gone, Hanabi sat in the forest, hunched over the scroll. The handwriting, she recognized, was not Niji's. It was way too messy for that. But the instructions had been addressed to him, it seemed, and signed by a person named R. Whoever the person who had written this was, man, she guessed, as the size and shape of the letters suggested a larger hand. Niji hadn't trusted him fully. It was clear from the way somebody else's note filled the margins with comments. Niji had trusted the man enough to accept the scroll and its instructions, yes, but not enough to take it at face value. And so he had someone else check the work over. There were not that many seal masters around, so if he had needed to find someone half as good as this R person was, he likely had spent a fair amount of time and money on it. As far as Hanabi knew, when he had left, he had worn the caged bird seal. So whatever had happened, he had become confident enough in the idea that it would work to desert the village while on a mission. With a red-haired man, according to his teammate Lee, who had not quite been knocked out at the time. And connecting the dots, if he had left everything behind to join that man, he was likely the one who had written the letter in the first place. And Niji had trusted in him. So, that was interesting, but what was she going to do now? It was clear that just removing the seal was not going to be an easy option. The clan, and by extension the village since branch members were the bulk of the active Hyuga ninja, would never accept that. And that made this scroll very dangerous. As well as the instructions that she had memorized almost unwillingly. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't even notice Toru was here before he caught the scroll from her hands deftly. "Give me that!" she screamed, reaching for it. Toru blurred, reappearing 10 meters away, the scroll open in front of him. "What do you intend to do with that?" Toru asked, once his Sharingan had read over its content. There was no hint of humor in his tone. Hanabi stiffened. "How did you even know I?" she let out, before realizing. "The sparrows. They're your summons." She had noticed many of them on her way to meet Niji, but had never thought. He nodded, just once. "So. That's none of your business." She shot back. "Give it to me." Surprisingly, he did so. "You're right. It's not." He paused. "Or rather, it shouldn't be. Do you think Niji can be trusted?" he asked. She blinked. What about all the other implications of it? Did he not know the trouble it would bring, or did he not care? "I don't know," she admitted. "Then let's make sure this thing works as it should." He smiled thinly. "You? Do you even know what this would mean?" Toru paused. "I'm not sure how that would work in practical terms, honestly," he mused. "I was never that good at politics, but I'd assume the Hyuga wouldn't want a revolution on their hands. The main house wouldn't like it, no," she said darkly. Hanabi kept her guard up, in case he was trying to get her to relax. Well, he decided. They should have done away with their stupid traditions before today, then. He grinned. "Plus that's something for later, we're not in Konoha yet." Toru. "Ah, man, I kinda wish we had somebody decent with sealing around," Toru said, in a wistful tone. "The things you can do with it." He trailed off. 2 men were waiting. She knew Toru was on good terms with both of them. "Huh," Toru said, I carefully blank, even as a smile stretched on his face. "Ag. K. You guys are not celebrating with everyone else." He laughed and she realized his fake laugh sounded entirely different from what she was used to. Hanabi also knew both of these guys were from Root. And something about its operatives creeped her out. "No. We saw the both of you leave, so we had to make sure everything was fine," Ag said. "Ah, I see, I see," Toru said. "Let's get back, then." "Sure." Kay nodded. "But first, hand over the scroll, please." Ag finished. Toru sighed. "Of course you guys heard, then." Hanabi clutched it. "No. You've heard her, guys." Toru tried to diffuse the tense atmosphere. "Let's discuss this with Suzuki around, all right?" "I'm sorry, Toru, but we can't do that," Ag said. "Why not?" "We have explicit directives from Danzo-sama concerning this type of situation." Hanabi wondered what he meant by type. Were there other things Danzo had planned contingency plans for? She didn't know that much about the current Hokage, who was a very private person, but he had the reputation of being ready to do whatever it took to preserve Konoha's strength. And the Hyuga were one of Konoha's strongest clans. There was no doubt that he would not allow losing their strength because of an inner conflict. Which meant that he would not hesitate to get rid of anything, or anyone threatening the precarious balance that kept everything running. I get that," Toru said, hands up in the air. "But I've read the scroll already." Hanabi didn't say anything, feeling breathless. Was he taking the responsibility for this? "You did?" Kay asked. "Yup." "Will you swear a binding oath not to use or reveal its contents?" He pressed. That's the only way we can let you go. You? Let me go? That's funny. Toru said, now amused. Also. No, I can't promise that. Toru. Eiji said carefully. Please think about what you're saying. Already did. Will you arrest me if I won't? Not right now. We are at war and we need you. Eiji said, a trace of true regret in his voice. But once we get back to the village. I see, I see. He smiled. I guess that's a problem for later. Let's go eat. No. Kei continued. We still need the scroll. He stared at Hanabi harshly. Have you read its contents? For the first time in a while, her expression betrayed her. Both Kei and Eiji pulled out weapons. What do you think you're doing, exactly? Toru asked, unfolding his arms. I'm sorry, Toru. Eiji said. Any Hyuga branch member who knows how to undo the seal must be dealt with. There was no question what dealt with meant here. By order of Danzo, I assume. Toru asked, voice entirely cold. No. Hanabi said, feeling far away from her own body. By a decree my grandfather passed, decades ago. And her own father had never even tried to repeal it. Why would he, when he had a decently strong heiress and had never cared that much about the worst aspects of the clan he was heading? Ah, fuck. Toru thought. This was a pretty shitty situation to be in. When Danzo had become Hokage, he bestowed his root cell a special status. Just like Konoha's military police, that the Uchiha led, any root operative could enforce the law, when it came down to it. There had been some outcry, especially from the Uchiha who felt the obvious slight against them, but the root members had never abused their new privilege, at least not openly, so it had died down slowly. Root would apply the law harshly, for sure, but they would apply the law. Some citizens had even started to prefer their almost invisible presence to the Uchiha police's more obvious, overbearing one. Root's status also meant that injuring or killing them was as good as a prison or death sentence. Obstruction in any way, as well. No matter who you were. They were Danzo's hands and eyes, after all. Which meant that as far as any Konoha citizen was concerned, they could lay down the law inside and outside of the village. There would be no getting out of here easily. Don't do this. Toru said, trying to buy them enough time to figure out what to do. Next to him, Hanabi assumed a fighting stance, the scroll folded away. It is the law. Kei grunted. Will you greet your judgment peacefully, Hyuga Hanabi? She said nothing in answer. Toru could see that she was trembling, despite her resolute face. We can find another way. Toru tried again. The laws have to be applied or they're not laws. Eiji said, sympathetic, but he would not be swayed. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Both of them were strong shinobi, Hanabi would not manage alone. Step aside, Toru. Kei said in a harsh tone. I don't think I can do that. He said. Are you going to oppose clan law, as well as our Hokage's decree? Toru hesitated. He seemed to deflate. No. You're right. Hanabi turned a frightened gaze toward him. Thank you. Eiji seemed to be relieved. It will be quick, Hyuga-san, we can promise you that much. Kei and Eiji moved as one man, swords drawn. Toru was better, faster. And they were focused on Hanabi. His Sharingan spun, catching Eiji's eyes, and his blade ensnared Kei. You bastard. Kei spat out. I should have known that dash. Eiji had the gall to shoot him a betrayed look. Toru sighed. What would you have me do, exactly? Hanabi stood there, unsure what was happening exactly. Please think about it, Toru. Eiji tried. You're making an enemy of the dash. Entire village, yeah. Toru sighed. All over an angry girl. Damn, I must be even dumber than I thought. And he did not even care about her in any romantic way to top it off. When Danzo-sama hears about this dash, Kei raged. Toru knew exactly what would happen. He'd be sent to jail, at a minimum. His continued survival would be used as leverage against Shisui, who Danzo actually seemed to fear. There was a reason why there had been so many root shinobi in both Toru and his brother's platoons. He won't. Toru said. Because I'm going to make you forget all about this, right now. Kei shot him a dangerous smile. Toru felt his stomach clench. What do you think was the first thing I did when we heard your little conversation? Toru winced, closing his eye. He had hoped that maybe you relayed the message to your great-uncle through your Baku summons. He growled out. That's exactly what I did. He shot him a dark grin. When he learns about this dash. Oh, shut up and sleep. Toru knocked him out with a blunt strike to the neck. I fucking hate your uncle. He grumbled. Toru, you're making the wrong choice here. Eiji said. I will keep the secret of what you did if you just relay a dash. Toru smiled a bit sadly. You're lying. And you gave me nothing but wrong choices. Sleep, you too. He used his Sharingan to force him to do so. There was no point in erasing their memories. By the time morning came, he'd be Konoha's latest traitor. Oh, and Hanabi, too. Hanabi, who was now crying somewhere behind him. Well, shit. Toru muttered. I guess there's really no going back after that. Chapter 76, His Lives and Times. The man watched his son read, fondly. He had always been such a curious boy. Father. He turned back, looking over his shoulder. What does ambiguous mean? Well, that's open to interpretation. He chuckled, particularly proud of his pun. They were one of his favorite things about being a dad, especially when his wife would give him a fond, exasperated look. His son stared, not sure what to make of his answer. Is this another of your jokes? He frowned. If so, I'm not sure I get it. The father laughed. It's the meaning of the word, too. That's what ambiguous means. Ah. The boy nodded fast. I get it. Do you really? Of course I do. His boy stood up, trying to look tall. I'm almost 6. I'm not a baby anymore. You'll always be my baby, though. His father laughed. Father. His son roared with indignation as he ruffled his thick hair, so similar to his own. The boy didn't stay mad for long. He laughed, grabbing his much bigger hand. Can you teach me how to create fire today? That's a bit dangerous, isn't it? He pretended to muse. Truth be told, he had promised. Father. Please, please, please. I wonder. He rubbed his beard, looking deep in thought. Very well. Yes. His boy cheered. I'll make one in no time, that's a promise. He laughed. Well, I guess we'll see if you can make it true, then, Indra. Ouch. He screamed in pain, as his big cousin, Ayaka, tugged his roots too hard. She chuckled. If you don't want to take care of it, maybe you shouldn't let it grow so long. But I want to. He shot back. Why? She hummed. Most boys your age cut their hair short, don't they? Won't they think you're strange? She knew how stupid kids his age could be about this sort of things. I don't care. He folded his arms, looking away sullenly. She paused. He seemed a bit sensitive about this. Well, she amended herself, he always was, despite how serious he tried to be. Her cute little brother. Well, cousin, technically, but everybody knew how close they were. Is there a reason you insist on keeping it so long? He grumbled something in answer. Didn't hear you. She hummed. I want to wear it like you. He grunted. I want everybody to know I think you're the best. Oh. Ayaka felt something in her stomach. He turned back at this moment, of course. Why are your eyes wet? He asked, blinking. My allergies are acting up again. She lied smoothly. He nodded very seriously and she chuckled. As if he understood what an allergy was in the first place. Her precious little brother. When Uchiha Ayaka dies, killed in a Senju attack, less than 2 months later, Madara cuts his hair short for the first and last time of his life. The Sharingan didn't feel like victory, despite what his clan said. It felt like death, like blood in the back of the throat. It felt like shaky hands, like a friend lying dead, staring at him almost accusingly. The smoke is thick in the air, and buildings crumble to nothing. He roars, howls his rage, his anger, and his pain at the world, leaping into the fray. When he kills, it is not to defend his brothers in arms, not to protect their home. No, all of this is spurred on by hatred. To him, the Sherinon felt like raw fury. Any time he thought he could forget, the memories would flash through his mind, just as vivid and clear as always. They called him the hope of the Uchiha. If this was what hope looked like, they were doomed, all of them. But he was Uchiha, still. There was no relief from this, besides death. Uzumaki Naruto was happy after he married Hinata. He had accomplished everything he had set out to do. He had become Hokage and brought peace to the 5 nations. They had 2 beautiful children, and many, many friends they considered family. He had grown up in a village that hated him, and he had made them see him, his worth. He and Kurama had become Konoha's greatest protectors. Time passed. Managing a village was still a strenuous job, even in times of peace. Naruto barely seemed to age. Oh, he still did, definitely, but much slower than his friends did. It was probably due to Kurama, he figured. When he woke up one morning next to Hinata's cold body, despite her advancing age, he still found himself surprised. He stood for long hours by her grave. Years and years later, when his own children die of old age, and he is barely looking 60, he decides it's time to go. The peace he had brokered, so long ago, is finally starting to crumble, as his strength slowly starts to fade and the shinobi world comes up with newer, more creative ways to kill each other. Let the world deal with the cycle of war on their own. He had tried. He bade farewell to a solemn Kurama, broke what little was left of the seal on his belly and let death take him. A voice spoke from far away. He thought of Sasuke, for some reason. Didn't I tell you how it would end, Ajura? Sarutobi Naruto cried when his wife Ino died, less than a year after they had married. The old man tried to console him, of course. But nothing, no platitudes, long-winded speeches could change anything to that very simple fact. Ino was dead. The woman he had loved was buried under the earth. There was nowhere he could go to escape that. Still, the old man convinces Fugaku-sama to let him leave the village for a little while, to see the world. Naruto met a strange man named Orochimaru in the land of Rice, who apparently had been Sarutobi's student, long ago. The misanthropic man warned him that a storm was on the horizon, and told him such eerily accurate things that Naruto became scared. The younger woman he was traveling with, the one with red hair which made him feel something, gave him a strange, contemplative look but ended up deciding she must have imagined whatever she had seen. Naruto left soon after, thoroughly creeped out by the man. He wandered over the world, setting foot into old nations, into new lands, until it all became similar to him. He came back to Konoha world weary. Rain, which had quietly been amassing power over decades, attacked. Naruto led an army of close to 1,000 men, as one of Konoha's strongest shinobi. He fought and fought, until Rain was forced back. The nine-tailed fox's power was not entirely his, but he could tame it well enough to defend his village. 6 men with orange hair, and a 7th wearing an orange mask, came for him, after that. The fox's power came to him during the battle which shattered the land of fire. He was lightning and he was wind, ravaging the earth and breaking the skies. But in the end, he was only one man, and he too was left broken. As men in black cloaks seize him, another ethereal voice spoke, from far away, sadly. "I'm sorry, Indra. I didn't want this to happen, even to you. Do you love me, Naruto?" Sakura asked, her tone deceivingly light. Uzumaki Naruto could feel her emotions, though. She was opening up to him fully, in a way he had never expected from his somewhat distant, last living friend. For she was the last of them, and soon they would face the last of their enemies. She was so strong, yet so vulnerable, in this moment. Her single eye gleamed under the moonlight. He could say yes, and it would be the truth. She would follow him to the depths of hell, and had made this clear, time and time again. And then she would die. Like Karen had died. Like Ino had died. Like his friends had died. I don't. He says instead, wishing he could not feel her heart shatter in 1,000 pieces through their bond. Soon enough, she leaves him. At least she will live, he thinks. Even without the Nine Tails, long since gone, Naruto becomes the strongest man since the Sage of Six Paths. Years and years go by, and he's killing each and every Akatsuki member, as well as their families, destroying the villages one by one to replace them with less centralized states. Naruto wins. He wasn't afraid. There was nothing he could lose. Not now, not anymore. He has brought the world to its knees. The peace will last until long after he dies, he knows already. Because when he dies, entirely alone, no one even realizes it. They fear he is immortal, and still watching. Inside him, a voice laughed, satisfied. I win this one, too, Azura. In all of the lives he sees, past, present and future, there is a common thread. He grows to become a fighter. Whether they call him a shinobi, a samurai, a demon, a warlord, an emperor, or a rotten bastard doesn't change that. Whether he starts as the heir of his clan, the pride and joy of his farmer parents, a dirty secret that the village would rather get rid of, the son of a living god or a wretch doesn't change that. Battle is in his blood, sings to him, calls to him. No matter what, he ends up fighting. Whether he is Indra, Raijin, Asuka, Shigeo, Tadashi, Ishikari, Asahi, Goro, Dai, Madara, Naruto, Osamu, Hajime, or any of the numerous others doesn't change that. Otsutsuki, Uchiha, Bayemura, Uzumaki, Sarutobi, Namikaze, Sharingan. No Sharingan. He married Ino. Hinata married him. Karen. Sakura. Nariko. Maisumi. Kaori. Ri. Yari. Michiko. All of them, and many more, he has loved at some point. He loves one woman. His indecision costs him all of them. He kills his love. His love stabs him through the heart. He brings peace to the world. He destroys it. The world ignores him entirely. He dies as a baby. Sometimes he was Azura and faced Indra. Sometimes he faced Azura, as Indra. It was all too confusing. The brothers' game is never-ending, all-encompassing, treading over the lives of many, all for what? A sibling rivalry that time did nothing to settle? He wins. He loses. 1,000 lives. A voice within him laughs. A voice within him rages. Somebody else wins. Somebody else loses. What did it even matter? It would never end any. The fuck am I moping for? Naruto shook his head, muttering to no one in particular. Himself, maybe. He ripped through the tapestry of possible pasts and futures. I'll find a way to stop this. That's the way I do things, Tabia. Ah shit, the verbal tic had returned. Sarutobi had mostly managed to curb it. One arm rose out of the cold waters. It grabbed onto a rock on the shore with a strong grip. Naruto pulled himself to the stony riverside, shaking the water off of his finally clean hair. What the fuck was that? He was close to the eastern gate, and he could see Kumo way up, higher on the cliff. The sun was not even up yet. Naruto huffed, feeling as though he had spent years in whatever that was. Purgatory? It was way too sharp, too real to be a simple hallucination caused by the freezing waters. More meddling by Indra, then. He wouldn't be too surprised, normally. But that didn't feel like him. Everything he has seen will become more vague soon, he knew, nothing remaining of it. The same way he felt after waking up from a dream. Already, he couldn't remember the memories as clearly. No human mind was meant for that, and it felt as though he had seen 1,000 movies, all of them crammed into a single moment, the detail of it lost in something that was beyond him, beyond the earth and beyond this side of existence. He breathed in. He wouldn't let the memories go. So he focused on the 2 seals carved into his temples. They were internal processes and he knew they would work. He knew it, because he had done the exact same thing already. That's how he had remembered more things about Kumo's latest happenings than he would ever really need, during his stay in jail, after all. Wakane. He called, focusing his chakra there, the supercharged rune enhancing his mind beyond its human limits for an instant. He felt a pounding in his head, but what was left of the clarity remained. Perfect. Because this could help him. There were plenty of mistakes he had already made, would have made, plenty more he would make on the way, he was sure. But he now knew of a few ways that wouldn't work. And he knew what it would take to make his newfound ambition a reality. Because he had seen what happened otherwise. An endless cycle of short-lived peace, followed by conflict, until something broke. That won't do, he thought. It won't do at all. Chapter 77, Purple Noon. Apparently, Kyumo had not called the alarm. At least, not yet. Naruto realized that, running without chakra through the gorge. Nobody seemed to be coming after him. If he had to bet on a reason why, it would be that the guard he had tricked into leaving his post was not willing to admit what he had done. Not before things became critical. Which would be when they found the corpse on the floor Naruto had been detained on. Which could still be hours away, depending on who else was supposed to come in today. He still had a bit of trouble believing it had actually worked, because he really had been running on sheer balls during most of the run. To think he could have died. And worse, it would not have been because he had improvised something so risky it gave him shivers now. But simply because he had been too heavy to be thrown properly. He was pretty sure he had felt something brush against him during his fall. Something that must have been the cliff. Well, he couldn't really be too mad about that. The rituals had changed his bone density entirely, as well as the amount of muscle mass he could put on his wide frame. He had weighed himself once, in the last few months, for curiosity's sake. His weight had come out to a bit over 170 kilos. Close to 3 times as heavy as the average human. Orochimaru had actually blinked that day. A shinobi could carry him, sure, but they'd better use chakra for the task. And he himself always made sure to keep himself balanced, or he used wind to make himself lighter when there was a risk of crushing someone smaller or weaker. He carried his weight well, his body more than strong enough to carry him easily, even without using his chakra. Naruto continued to run until he came close to a fishing town. He had gone south, so he assumed this was the place. There were Kyumo ninja patrolling, of course. From their lack of care, he assumed this place was not that important, compared to Kyumo's main port. And he assumed there was a chakra barrier around the harbor as well, which would explain their carelessness. They relied on it too much. Did they forget that civilians could also carry covered operations? Well, he wouldn't register as anything over a small animal, considering his bindings. And their carelessness meant they still were not on high alarm. Naruto sneaked in the boring way. He got down to the floor and waited until the soldiers were distracted. Then he crawled under a small house. He had always been one of the best of his graduating class at sneaking, but he was not exactly the same size as he had been when he was still a kid. Despite that, things still went smoothly. He was in the town. Nobody was paying much attention, so he got out in the open, dusting himself and acting as casually as he could, considering the circumstances. He was palming a sharp rock he had found on the way here. The place was not that big, so if Ino really was here, she should likely be easy enough to find. He walked through the streets, passing a bent-over old woman with curious eyes, keeping his own open. All right. Maybe she wasn't there yet, then. He would still go for a third walk around the place, but he was afraid it was starting to look somewhat suspicious. There was nobody that really fit Ino's general size. And he assumed she had used an old-fashioned disguise, considering what she had told him about Kyumo's security. Ah. The old crone was still staring at him, muttering gibberish. The way her back bent made him cringe. Naruto dug through the warden's pockets and found some crumpled-up bills. He got himself some food, happy not to be eating prison slop anymore. "You're not from here, are you?" the old crone asked, her accent thick with southern lightning drawl. Naruto pretended not to stiffen. He had not noticed her get so close. He didn't let her see that, either. Parents were from abroad. He grumbled in answer, trying to match her own accent. "It shows," she muttered back, still staring at him. He looked back, vaguely annoyed. Dirty brown hair, leathery skin that made her face look like melted wax. Her eyes, he noticed, were baby blue, looking greenish under the right angle. Naruto couldn't hold back a chuckle. "Ino? Is that you?" he muttered lowly, so that no one would overhear. Not that anyone was paying any attention to the grimy shinobi talking to the half-mad old crone. Which was kinda the point. "Who else?" she whispered back, in her normal voice. "Took you long enough." He started to laugh. Apparently, it was contagious, because she did so as well. Ino wiped her eyes quickly. "You managed." She guided him to an obscured alley smoothly. "Yeah. I hope they kept track, because this sort of escape should go straight into their record books." He chuckled. "I'm sure there are a few other smelly animals who managed to stumble their way out of Kumo before, so let's not get too wild here." "Who are you calling an animal?" he grunted. "Take a guess." Ino laughed. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "These are not even my clothes." "Ew." She tried to get away from him, laughing. "Don't. Somebody's going to notice." Still, she didn't push him away. They found refuge behind one of the many waterfalls that fell close to the village. Ino removed her disguise, the complexity of which gave him another reason to be impressed by her skill. From deepening the crow's feet around her eyes, to sculpting enlarged earlobes, to painting broken veins, adding wrinkles in spots that would look natural, creating jowls using rubber prosthetics, creating texture and elongating pores. Then adding another layer of decay, making the nose and ear larger, and making it all fit together. Ino removed it all with a sigh of pleasure. Then she did the same with her hands, where she had used the same process. Naruto said nothing. She blinked, looking at him in confusion. "What is it?" "Feeling creeped oh you dash." He took Ino into a hug, a real one this time. Her arms wrapped around his neck to keep him close, hugging him fiercely and laughing. "You have no idea how hard it was to sneak things inside here," Ino said, later, when they settled down on the floor. "The crone disguise helped. Of course you can sneak many things under a wide robe. But pretending you're part of the background into a village that's small." "Heh." Naruto smiled, happy to see her in decent spirits. She stood up and hiked her robe up, exposing her legs. He tried to keep his eyes somewhere else. "Anyway, I got you a few weapons," she said, pulling twin daggers, complete with scabbards, out. There was a short tanto for her too. How the hell did she even sneak weapons in? Since we won't be able to use chakra. True to her words, she still had her own chakra bound. Naruto frowned. "Why don't we just go now? You remove your seal, help me break mine and we leap away. Or just yours, even." "I don't think you get it," she said slowly. "What do you mean?" "It's not just that the village and the harbor are covered with chakra-detecting fields," Ino complained. "It's the fact that the whole domain is. You got this far because they can't notice someone with no real chakra signature." "Meaning?" "Meaning that they will feel us the moment we remove the seals, especially if we build up chakra for a two-people leap. And after having our chakra bound for some long, it's going to take a little while. I think it's a bit too risky, if there are shinobi close." Ino paused. "Meaning we have to get at least 10 kilometers further away from Kumo to be safe." "Fuck," he just said. "Yeah, basically. I have a plan, though, but first tell me about how you got caught, please," Ino asked. He did. "So you think this Uchiha Madara, or Toby, whatever, guy is controlling the Raikage?" she asked, horrified. The implications were bad. "I'm sure that he is influencing him, in some way. And considering it's Akatsuki we're talking about, it's nothing good, this much I'm sure of. Do you think he could be doing to other people at the same time?" Naruto winced. "I don't know, honestly. Maybe. Let's assume he is." Their half-formed idea of sending similar scrolls, containing info about Akatsuki, to the other villages already had sounded like it probably wouldn't accomplish much, but this complicated things even more. They had thought that they would at best have spies in high places, Not this. Is everyone fine, at least? Naruto asked. Yes. Ino nodded. Sakura and Karen are staying somewhere close to Yujito, right now, in case anything happens. Sakura's the one who warned us that you had disappeared, and Karen confirmed you fought someone close to Kumo. We were not sure what the situation was with Kumo, so we didn't say anything to her. He finished, nodding in understanding. Yeah, I get it. I'll explain things to her myself. And about Darui, too. Yes. She nodded somberly. Did you hear anything about an alarm? He asked. No. Ino shook her head. I don't know how you did it, but they don't even seem to be looking after you. Trust me. He laughed. You don't want to know. It's another of your crackpot ideas, wasn't it? Ino asked dryly. He just smiled and she sighed. It had worked. Well, you're lucky you've got us to make sure you don't actually kill yourself. Yeah. I'm lucky to have you, Ino. He stared at her. She froze. Naruto. Ino gave him a long, searching look. He just smiled and looked away. Can I ask you something, Ino? Anything. He stood up, and removed his Kumo flak jacket, and then his shirt. Ino took in a sharp breath, eyes wide. I. Her face looked red from the cave's strange light. Now? Are you sure? Yes. Naruto nodded, and after some inner deliberation, Ino came closer, if a bit shakily. I know we can't remove them now, but if you could describe the seals to me, it would allow me to remove them as quickly as possible, if we ever ran into trouble. Ino paused. Oh. Yeah. Right, that makes sense. The seals. Naruto nodded encouragingly. I don't know which sealing style they used, but there's only one way to figure it out. I'm counting on you, Ino. She sighed. Right, of course. Ino sat down closer to him, her eyes roaming over the seals on his back. He knew. Can you describe them out loud? He asked, amused. Oh, yeah. She chuckled awkwardly. Sure. There's about a dozen of them, all with different patterns. Describe them. One of them looks like two big lines, and a thinner one under. Not very precise. And that sounded like his coho seal. Can you trace it with your finger? Yeah. Right. Sure. She did, hesitantly at first, as though his skin were on fire. Nah, this one's mine. Oh. My bad. It's on me. He laughed. Let me point out which ones are mine, then. He did so, stretching his arms into a few uncomfortable positions. And that means all the rest are the Kumo ones. Ah. I think I get it now. Ino nodded. She hesitated. So. Are these the ones you carved into your skin? Why is there no scar? I heal fast, I guess. There's only the ink left, at this point. All right. She pointed at the seals that she now knew were not his, one by one. There are 5 of them, then. It's always the same pattern. A kanji for limit, surrounded by 4 smaller components that. Let me show you. She traced her nail along them, and Naruto focused on getting a mental representation of it, as precisely as possible. Ah. The 4 points sealing style, then. He nodded. Not his favorite style. Too blunt, and no real room for creativity. I think I can write a release counterpoint, that I could trigger physically when needed, so that I could remain mostly invisible in the meantime. He looked at her. What is it? She asked. You got any ink on you? There's no fucking way I'm carving seals into your back with a knife. Ino said hotly. He frowned. What was so strange about that? We don't have any ink, though, you said. He retorted. I don't care. She folded her arms. Naruto knew that she would fold if he really stressed what they were risking if they got caught. Okay. We can do it another way. It's just going to require one tiny, itty-bitty knife slash. Ino hesitated. Well, One quick wound is a bit more acceptable than spending an hour carving you up. I knew you'd see the light. He laughed. All right. She sighed. Guide me before I lose the will to do so. So he did. One quick slash through a smaller component of one of the 5 seals. Are you sure this won't get us noticed? She stressed. It won't. He assured her. The amount of chakra I can now use from this, is the difference between 1 and 2 rats together, at most. I'm sure Kumo has better things to do than tracking rats. It's still far from large enough to register as human. Civilians emitted more chakra than both of them did, covered in seals. If you say so. She said dubiously. What was the point of this? He smiled proudly. You remember the 4th my father's scrolls. Of course. And how could she forget? She had left the village over this whole thing. Not that she blamed him, honestly. Yeah, right. He winced. Well, I reverse engineered something very useful from his research. And I had a lot of time to think about some concepts when I was in Kumo's best hotel. This time, she winced. So here goes. He didn't need to bother with ink anymore. He drew the counterpoint in his mind, every aspect of it. Focusing the lightest touch of chakra through his finger, one that he knew would never be detected, he applied the seal with a single touch, close to the spot where Ino was pointing with her own finger. Ino began. Yeah, I guess that's one step forward. He smiled proudly. Namikaze Minato's ability to put seals in / or shiki, he could almost hear Orochimaru's voice say down with a single touch had complemented his incredible speed and talent with the sealing arts, extremely well. Naruto couldn't pretend to be anywhere this level yet, but this opened a world of possibilities, in and out of battle. He repeated the same process 4 times. Then he placed the trigger seal on the back of his hand. All I'm going to have to do to open all of them up is slash through this one. He confirmed it to Ino. Will you need something similar? Actually. Sure. She then hesitated. But, the seal is in the middle of my back, though. I don't know if dash. Sure, take your shirt off. He said casually. Something up. Naruto tilted his head. Maybe she wanted more privacy? Never mind. She gritted out, thunder written all over her face. She likely had taken this as a provocation. Shit. I know this expression. He forgot she was bashful sometimes, considering how brash she could be. Ino removed her top entirely, staring at him angrily the whole time, her breasts falling free. Naruto blinked, his throat suddenly dry. Ino seemed to realize what she had done, something like panic flashing across her face, and her hands flew up, covering the pink of her areola that Naruto couldn't help but notice. All right. Turn around. He said, voice thick. Ino did so, worrying her lower lip nervously. Naruto's fingers traced along the seal written close to her spine, and she let out a strange little sound. Naruto recognized Karen's work, even though he had trouble remembering much about the peculiarities of it, right now. He focused, before applying a similar counterpoint seal. Can you give me your hand? Naruto then asked. Ino said nothing, just raising her hand to his slowly. He pressed his thumb down on the back of it, applying the trigger seal. There. It's done. He said. Thank you, Naruto. She stared at him, one hand still covering her breasts, her eyes so full of something that scared him. She was telling him 1,000 words, without even speaking. Naruto can't help but feel his mind being dragged back to the river. To the lives he has spent, or rather, could have spent by her side. He knows it wasn't a dream, because he is sure that some part of him has already seen her give him the very same look. And she didn't even realize the way she was looking at him, he was sure of it. For all of her skill and strength and beauty, self-doubt ate at her like it did him. Seeing Ino sit here, in front of him, her soul almost bared to him, all that Naruto felt was abject terror. Terror that he would screw up. Break his own heart, break Ino's. Break Karen's. Terror that he'd make a mess of the already complicated situation. That he'd destroy everything that he held dear. Terror of what lay ahead. That he wouldn't be strong enough to survive what would come. Terror that his bid for freedom would kill them all. He has seen it happen and knows it's not only a far-off possibility. It is a very, very real one. And he has also seen what happens if he pushes them away. And he won't have this, either. Unsure of what to think, or what to do, Naruto acts on instinct, as always. He pulled Ino on his lap, his head buried in her hair. He could feel her breasts pressing against his chest, as her hands held onto him for dear life, breathing hard. And he knows just how nervous she is, her heart beating so fast that he's afraid she is going to faint. Naruto doesn't do anything else, content to just hold Ino close. Chapter 78, Leaves, Falling. Of course, things became somewhat awkward when they realized they still had to escape. Ino turned around, getting dressed again quickly. He knew her well, she'd likely not mention anything about the last 5 minutes for a while. So, he finally asked, "What's the escape plan?" "Ah." She blinked, finally facing him. "True. I never told you. Now, where did I stash them, again?" Ino rummaged through the little cave, digging behind some rocks with her arm, wincing when she had to reach farther inside it. She said nothing for a while, her face scrunched in concentration. She looked pretty cute, Naruto had to admit. "Aha!" she exclaimed. "Got them." Ino threw some clothes as well as some supplies down. Then she held up 2 wooden passports. "With this," Ino continued, proudly, "we'll be able to pass through the checking station and leave with a boat, no trouble." "Why a boat?" "The controls are much tighter through the land exits, I can assure you. There have been plenty of people leaving the land of lightning since the start of the war, particularly to the land of tornadoes, the island to the east. Kumo doesn't particularly care about them, so the security is a bit more lax when it comes to leaving through there." Naruto took a closer look at the passports. "Kusumoto Akira and Kusumoto Cho? From Ryernobe, in the land of tornadoes," he said with some amusement. The fakes were very well made, and he wondered where she had gotten them. "It's just easier to pretend we're married." Ino defended herself. "Kumo will overlook a couple of farmers easier, because they tend to marry young. Were you just looking for a reason to roleplay?" He wiggled his eyebrows. "I'm going to fucking kill you," she muttered, teeth clenched. "I'm joking, Ino. Now come here and kiss your darling husband." He laughed, before catching the wooden passport she threw at his face in between his teeth. "This is the last time I'm helping you break out from jail, you. Ino raged. She paused, blinking, before starting to chuckle. "I'm not even sure why I still get triggered so easily," she admitted. "It wouldn't be you otherwise." Naruto smiled. Ino disguised both of them as farmers, which might well be the only way his build might make sense. She had clearly planned around it, and got him clothes about his size, that downplayed his obvious strength as much as possible. "Once we board the ferry boat," Ino said, applying reddish-brown dye to his long hair. "After an hour or so, we should be far enough to jump." There was no real point in waiting until they were at sea, of course. "Do we really have to blacken our teeth?" he asked hesitantly. "That's what they do in this area of tornadoes, so yeah," she said, rubbing them with the wax. He followed soon after. Ino blended some dyes together, before applying the resulting mix to his face, neck, arms, and legs. She added more pale yellow, and did the same to herself. "For real? A fake beard?" he asked. "Won't that be even more suspicious?" "Well, it's real hair, so." She laughed when he grunted in answer, not too happy about that specific piece of information. She checked him over. "There you go." She smiled in satisfaction. "How's your tornado accent?" "What did you say?" Naruto asked, squinting his eyes in concentration. "Never mind. Just answer by yes and no when asked, and I'll do the talking." She gave him a weak smile. They bought 2 overpriced fare tickets to the land of tornadoes, not intending to complete their journey. Moving to the checking point, Ino took their passports out of their bag. She had bought one on their way there, because a couple of farmers would likely use one, instead of relying on sealing scrolls. Finally, they were at the front of the line. The Kumo officer behind the booth looked at them sharply. He was about twice Ino's size, with an almost shiny bald head. Next. He grumbled. "Hello." Ino said with a thick accent. "Hello. Identification, please." Ino put the wooden passports on the counter. Naruto hoped they looked convincing. They did to him, but what did he know about this? Not much. The officer looked at it for a moment, raising one eyebrow. He looked at Ino, passing her over, then at Naruto. Then down at the passport. "You're kinda big for a farmer, aren't you?" The man's brows furrowed. Naruto blinked, staring at him dumbly, as Ino had instructed him. "What's wrong with him?" the officer asked. "He's not very social." Ino apologized for him, waving it off. "Sociable," the man corrected with a grunt. He stared some more. "Whatever you say, boss." Ino chirped happily. "What sort of farmers are you, exactly?" Naruto grunted in answer. "I make things grow. Animals, too." The officer mumbled something rude about country hicks, rolling his eyes, but handing them their passports back. "Yeah, okay. You guys go through, then." He waved them off. Next. They managed to get aboard the boat with no trouble. People were packed on the small vessel like sardines. Some of them were obviously fleeing for their lives, some held hope that the land of tornadoes would be spared from the ongoing war, some saw better opportunity there. It was strange for a liminal space, a contradiction of hope and despair, of misery and relief. There were a few Kumo shinobi on board, which meant they had to keep a low profile, huddling next to a few other people, all of them going for the full trip as well. "I heard you talk with the checking officer and I couldn't help but wonder," Naruto heard someone say, noticing Ino was making a point of not looking at the person in question. "You guys are not from the land of tornadoes at all, are you?" the woman asked, in a quiet voice. Naruto knew Ino well, which was the only reason he noticed her stiffening. Instead of showing that she had been rattled, she turned around with an amused expression. "And why would you say something like that?" she said, the accent just as heavy as before. "Mostly because I've been around there recently, and I know that there are no farmers left in Ryernobe, since the drought and saltwater intrusion. It's something we used to do, before," Ino said, with just the right amount of wistfulness and longing and offense in her tone. Naruto was impressed, as he definitely was not a very good actor. "Don't think nobody from Kumo ought to know. And did you know this accent you're using was only found in the southern part of tornadoes?" the woman asked. "That's where my family was originally from." Ino lied easily. "All of them?" "Yeah." "Ah, all right, then." She nodded. Ino looked somewhere else, thinking this was it. The woman continued. "That's amusing, because I was lying. This is an eastern accent. And going from Ryernobe, which is to the west, crossing through the no-man's lands that is the middle of the country to go to the east." The woman paused. "Yeah, that's pretty unlikely. What's more likely is dash. I think we get your point." Naruto whispered evenly, not even bothering with the charade. She raised her arms up in the air. "I don't mean anything by it. Everybody has their own reasons for leaving." Ino shot her a distrustful look. "Who are you?" "Nobody important, really. If you're going to be blackmailing us, I think you've got a decent angle, right here." Naruto shrugged, fingering his dagger. "Get on with it." The longer they could keep her talking, the closer they'd get to actually escaping. "And who said anything about that?" She looked amused. "I'm only looking forward to meeting fellow refugees." "I'm sure." Naruto nodded, keeping his face even. "Can't I simply be curious?" she asked. "You could be." The woman seemed to look for something in his eyes. She seemed to find it, because she nodded in satisfaction, a strange light burning into her own. The worst part was the fact that he was almost certain he had seen her somewhere before. Naruto stayed on edge the whole time, ready to break his seals. Yes. The woman muttered. Yes, I could be. Ino stared at the strange woman, with long flowing white hair despite not looking a day over 30 and golden eyes that made her seem much older than the hair itself did. Her fancy clothes did not fit at all in a boat full of people trying to escape lightning. The woman had resumed staring at the river shore. Honestly, if she were trying to look like a mysterious outsider, she had the part down to a T. They would reach the delta soon, Ino knew. Hopefully, this weirdo would leave them alone. Just for curiosity's sake, she tried to get a surface reading of her thoughts. It was tricky, considering the extremely limited amount of chakra she could make use of right now, but she was not had been considered the most talented Yamanaka of her generation for nothing. Though she didn't show it, she was greatly disturbed by what she found there. The only thing she really felt was a lazy detachment for, well, everything. No, she amended herself. For almost everything. There was something that burned brightly within her, eclipsing everything else, that made all of it seem irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. She could pretend to be a curious passerby as much as she wanted, the mind would not lie. Ino didn't dare reach deeper, because she knew she would get caught in the process. Whoever that woman was, she was not as average as she said she was, far from it. Not that Ino had believed it. Ino remained wary, almost itching for a fight. No good opportunity to leave smoothly presented itself, with the Kumo shinobi staying too close, and soon they were down in the delta, switching to a bigger ship. The woman spoke to them again. You know, if you're trying to make a break for it, now might be your best chance. She said with knowing eyes. Naruto just stared, trying to figure out where he could possibly have seen her. Why don't you just mind your own business? Ino said harshly. Bansai Fortress, at around the same time. Suzuki. Toru called. His tone made Suzuki pause from reading the report that had been given to him. He stood up and followed him silently. Once they were out of sight from the rest of the Konoha camp, he stared at Toru, now worried. You disappeared for the last few hours. What's happening? Toru seemed to think about it for a second. I think I need to leave the village. Suzuki stared for another moment. There was no question about what he meant. You wish to become a missing ninja? He asked with a flat voice. I don't want to. I need to. Is this about the war? Suzuki asked, thinking fast. The war took its toll on all of them, no matter how much his cousin and he tried to put on a strong face. Look, I understand. We can probably find you something. I knocked 2 root agents out and left them in the forest. Danzo is going to know, for sure. They sent a messenger already. Suzuki breathed out. That's. Why did you do that? He stressed out the last part. As an Uchiha, that would put Toru in a complicated position. And Danzo didn't fuck around. Ever. Look. I'll speak with Itaki as soon as possible. I think we can probably work something out, instead of jail and dash. Nah. Toru interrupted. It was a culling operation. I stopped them from killing someone marked as a target. Fuck. Suzuki said darkly. Who was it? And what happened? AGNK. Hanabi is in possession of a way to get rid of the caged bird seal. Suzuki knew exactly what that meant. And this was Hinata's sister they were talking about. Yeah. Toru nodded. Pretty bad. Who gave it to her? Suzuki asked, suspicion obvious in his tone. Niji, of course. Toru said with some dark amusement. Should have known it. He cursed. Of course it was fucking Niji causing trouble again. He wasn't even in the damn village. Toru continued, unimpeded. So yeah, while Danzo's in power, at the very least. I need to get out. Hanabi too. That's still Suzuki stopped himself. Madness? No, madness would be staying. Where would you even go? Out and about. Toru shrugged. Toru. Suzuki growled. He clearly had no plan. You can help me by arranging a pardon in the coming years, though. Toru chuckled. I was getting sick of this war business, anyway. Is there no way I can get you to reconsider? Of course not. I never back down from my promises. Toru paused. Well, except when they're not to my advantage anymore, of course. Sasuke closed his eyes in consternation. Will you manage out there? Of course, of course. Toru waved off. Is there anything I can do to help, at least? Besides the pardon? Sure, sure. Name your firstborn after me if it's a boy. He laughed. Nah, wait, he'll be a Hyuga? Maybe not, then. I don't dash. Sasuke cut him off by pulling him tight into a hug. Surprised by the fact Sasuke, his emotionally stunted cousin, well no, he was actually very expressive for an Uchiha who usually wasn't too big on public displays of affection, actually hugged him. It took him a while to return it. He patted him on his back, before releasing him. Then he realized something was going on. Ah, fuck. Toru said, wiping his eye. I've got terrible allergies. They're making water run down my face. Sasuke's own eyes were a bit shiny. Yeah. He sniffed, too. Mine, too. An old Uchiha inside joke. They shared a laugh and Sasuke pressed a pouch into Toru's hands. Take this, at least. There's enough cash to keep you afloat for a while. War bounty. I'm afraid I can't answer this. Sasuke chuckled. I'll take it, then. And please. Sasuke finally let out. Please. Be careful out there. Ah. Of course, brother. Toru grinned. You know me. Exactly. I'll find a way to contact you that doesn't drag you into my shit, then. Toru continued. And well, see you, whenever the old fart dies, then. Hopefully you don't have grandkids, by then. Sasuke took a long breath. Yeah. He said weakly. See you then. I'll get your pardon. Please, no crimes against humanity in the meantime. All he got in answer was a wink. Toru turned to leave, and Sasuke didn't need the Sharingan for the image to stay with him. Ah. Toru hesitated. Say goodbye to my brother for me. He will understand. And to Atake, too. Tell him thanks for everything. Sasuke's voice was thick. I will. Anko's snakes relayed the information to her. An Uchiha and a Hyuga, out of Konoha and on their own, then. She muttered to herself. They likely would get into a world of trouble as soon as the word got out. There was no village that would not try to either sway them, or kidnap them outright. Thing was. That was as good an opportunity as it got. Sensei would definitely give her shit if she didn't at least try her hardest to get them to come aboard. Well. She thought. Time to bring out some good ol' Anko charm. They just so happened to have a few great seal masters on hand. Naruto would only be too happy to help screw with Konoha if the younger women had managed to get him out of jail already. That ought to make the deal a sweet one, indeed. She stood up, and moved to meet Uchiha Toru and Hyuga Hanabi, ready to make good use of her first mover advantage. Oh, sure, there was the whole Hokage murder thing, but she could explain that one away. Hopefully. Anyways, she was sure most people liked islands more than cutthroat politics. Chapter 79, Snake's Disciples. With no better option, and Kyumo Shinobi's close presence, Naruto and Ino went on the seafaring ship. One of the Kyumo Shinobi came to stand right next to Naruto. He was tall and wore heavy Kyumo-style armor, as well as a large sword. Another man, this one bald, came next to Ino. This one started talking. Are you Kusumoto Akira and Cho? We are. Ino nodded, accent back on. The shinobi close to Naruto smiled thinly. I was hoping we might be able to speak. Sure. Naruto nodded. What about? Where are your manners, Akira? Ino hit his shoulder. Please have a seat. Naruto grunted something that sounded like assent. I hope you don't mind our intrusion. One of them said. Not at all. Ino laughed. You have a lovely wife. The other said, his eyes roaming over her. Naruto noticed Ino stiffening. Thank ya. He said curtly, his eyes never leaving the shinobis. I'm lucky. You definitely are. They sat down next to them. Let's cut straight to the case. Bald One said. Beg your pardon. Naruto asked, somewhat rudely. What did you say? Tall One asked dangerously. Naruto could almost feel Ino telling him to backtrack. Didn't understand what that meant. He grunted. The expression. Oh. Something like condescension flashed across Tall One's eyes. True. You're from far away, aren't you? Near Rairo, yeah. Sure. Bald One gave him a bland smile. We will not waste your time is what I said. Ah. Naruto nodded. Good. Are you aware of who we are? He continued. Ino nodded. Yes. Please, tell us what you know already. You two are shinobi from Kumo, in Cha. Good. So you can tell that much. And are you aware of what our specific role is? Not really, no. She shook her head. Please clarify for her, then. Tall One said. Sure. Bald One answered. One of Naruto's hands was fingering his dagger, ready for anything to happen. Bald One leaned over to Ino, too close to her. He could see the worried look in her eyes. Something hot and angry flashed through Naruto's mind. We find rats. Bald One finished. For a moment, Naruto could smell the familiar scent of blood in the air, picturing his dagger slipping through the man's neck faster than he could react. Something thrummed inside his head, and it was not only the very familiar call of the storm. Rats. Ino blinked owlishly. Are there really rats on this boat? Tall One chuckled darkly. More than you'd expect. Your rodent problem doesn't really have much to do with us. Naruto grunted. I'm sure. Bald One nodded. We just prefer to be thorough. He paused. Do I need to explain what thorough means, maybe? He asked snidely. Sure, why don't ya? Naruto nodded, his eyes not leaving his. Could he break his seal fast enough not to get Ino and himself killed? The man ignored him. I doubt this has anything to do with you, but we have something of a situation, today. Really? Ino asked. What happened? Nothing bad, I hope. There are a few people who are not supposed to be on this boat, who managed to get on board. We're trying to find them. Oh. Ino managed to look contrite. I see. And that's not it. What else? Naruto asked gruffly. We had an unwanted guest leave Kumo today. What kind of guest are we talking about? Ino asked. The prisoner sort. Tall One finished. One of them escaped. Isn't Kumo's supposed to be secure? Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. Tall One smacked him across the face, splitting his lip open. Ino screamed. Some passengers definitely had noticed what was happening, but they pretended not to. Naruto held a hand in front of her, the other bringing up his fingers to his lips. His thumb brushed his bleeding lip. He stared at the Tall One again, not saying anything. Right now, he hoped his emotions didn't show on his face. Murder was never a good look. This is your only warning. The man spat. Sure. I think I gotcha. Naruto replied easily, not blinking. The rumors are. Bald One continued, not paying them any mind. The man named Uzumaki Naruto might still be around. Maybe on this very boat. Maybe you've heard something about that. A pause. No guy with the name, no. Naruto shrugged. When'd he leave? And why? Isn't Kumo nice this season? Will you shut the hell up? Tall One seemed ready to hit him again. Please, stop. Ino said, looking defeated. He won't say anything to anger ya no more. Bald One stopped his fellow Kumo shinobi. You heard her. Funny thing is. Tall One said, now paying close attention to Naruto. He's a large man. Strangely enough. He's about your size. He looked as though he didn't care about this at all, but it would give him a decent enough reason to kill Naruto, at least. So. Naruto grunted. The Kumo shinobi's hand went to his sword. Naruto's hand stood ready to break his seals open. He would kill them both and escape. Ino understood it in that moment, and she prepared as well. Shinobi-san! Shinobi-san! The woman from before came running, breathless. We found the man you were asking about earlier. Can't you see we're busy? Which man? The tall one asked rudely. Uzumaki Naruto. Everybody halted. What do you mean? Bald one asked, blinking. Uzumaki Naruto. She said. He has been found hiding in a crate. The woman led one of the shinobi down. The other, the tall one, stayed to keep an eye on Naruto and Ino. Don't think this means you're out of trouble, you country hick. He muttered. Naruto frowned. Look, I still don't know what the hell ya guys are rambling about, but I'm waiting too, believe me. Ino rubbed circles on the back of his hand, as a reminder not to do anything rash. They'll get it sorted out, dear. The Kumo shinobi tightened his hand around his bicep, waiting. His partner came back, white-faced. We have to go. The woman followed behind him, looking terrified. Go where? The tall one answered. What are you talking about? Uzumaki Naruto escaped the boat. He said. He killed Shigeru by slitting his throat and was seen diving into the water. What? We have to go. Now. He can't be far. The tall one hesitated, shooting a dark look at Naruto. Who gave him his best, I told you so, smug expression. The Kumo ninja's hand twitched, but he ended up leaving, after kicking him in the stomach one last time. The two Kumo shinobi left, leaping onto the water. The terror suddenly dropped from the woman's face. Who the hell are you? Naruto asked her, dropping all pretense of not being himself. And how did you know? She just gave him a mysterious smile. Not even a thank you, then. Color me surprised. Naruto's hand twitched. For some reason, he felt more in danger now than he had been when the two Kumo shinobi were around. This woman was a complete unknown. And she was clearly trained in the shinobi arts. Well, it has been nice meeting you. The woman nodded to him, before sending an unreadable look to Ino. Who are you? Naruto asked again. She gave him a long searching look. You can call me Shachi. And with that said, she disappeared around the corner. Naruto had the feeling this wasn't the end of it. They were likely not under suspicion anymore. In just a few minutes, they'd be able to slip away. Both Naruto and Ino seemed to deflate. Look. She finally said. Yeah. Naruto asked. Next time we go up on a boat. She started. Yeah. Next time. Let's make it a nice and relaxing trip. With no stakes, all right. Ino breathed out at last. Naruto could only let out a weak chuckle. Hey there. Anko grinned, dropping casually in front of Toru and Hanabi. His blade flashed from its sheath, glinting under the moonlight. Snakes shot out of Anko's sleeve, wrapping around Toru's hand and keeping the wakaizushi in its scabbard. Hanabi went for Anko's unprotected back, but a swift knee strike to her gut left her reeling. Snakes wrapped around her entirely, keeping her immobilized. Don't. Anko said to Toru, whose other hand was already weaving hand seals. I'm not going to hurt either of you. Sure doesn't feel like it. He said evenly, racking his brains for a way to get them out of this sticky situation. It had barely been an hour since they had left Suzuki. Were they this bad at being missing ninja? Anko laughed. Yeah, sorry about that. I'd get why you're on guard, though, what with being missing ninja and all. Oh, I'm sure you understand the feeling quite well. He raised an eyebrow. The fact she knew this already was a bad sign. Very bad one. How's Ino, by the way? Toru asked, keeping his tone even despite his complicated feelings on the issue. So you do recognize me? Anko grinned sharply. Of course. I'm in the hunting corps, after all. I mean, I was. He muttered. Orochimaru, Ino, and that Indra guy. You've all become pretty popular, lately. We sure did, didn't we? Sure, Sure. He nodded calmly, but his grip on his sword's grip was tightening, until his knuckles turned white entirely. Anko noticed it, even though she knew she had to avoid staring at the blade itself. Tends to happen when killing a cage. You can turn your Sharingan off, she said, ready for a fight as well. I know you layered an illusion to make it look like it is off already, but I won't fall for it. I'm afraid I can't do this, he said, tone hard. Oh? And why is that? Your lot killed my cousin's father. He now growled. We didn't, Anko said, shaking her head. Toru snorted. Of course not. His eye suddenly turned to a point beyond Anko's shoulder. Hanabi, now! He shouted. Anko turned around, whirling. Only to realize that Hanabi was exactly where she had left her, still trapped by her snakes. Ah fuck. She had fallen for the oldest trick in the book, and she'd have to convince both of them to keep silent about it if she wanted to keep her credibility. If she managed to convince them, of course. Anko's hand went up to parry Toru's kick. Internally, she nodded in approval at the way he had bent and stretched himself to attack despite her tight hold on him. A good fit for snake style. She ducked under the second kick that followed, smashing the handle of a kunai inside his gut, with enough force to send him flying up in the air. He tried to use that to his advantage by wrapping his hand around the sword's sheath to free it. Anko had known he would do something like this, though, and the snakes twisted, keeping the sword in its scabbard. He released a fireball at her, one that she dodged, all the while maintaining the snakes coming out of her sleeves. God, this was going to be annoying. Stop, Anko ordered, tightening her hold over him and getting a little bit frustrated. You're trying my patience. And why should I? Toru asked. She sighed and created a shadow clone who replaced her in holding Hanabi. Toru, she kept bound herself, moving behind him and forcing his head up. Your Sharingan is still on, isn't it? Anko asked in return, not waiting for an answer. Good. Don't try anything funny. Then I want you to take a good look at my clone, so that you know I'm not lying. You can do that by reading my body language, can't you? I don't have much of a choice, do I? Toru grunted in answer, letting the illusion that hid his Sharingan fall away. There was not much of a point in that anymore. He would try to snare the clone into an illusion to make it attack its master, once her guard was down. Not really, no, she said, shrugging. You, there. Hyaga. Do the same thing. Hanabi was still bound, her mouth as well, but after shooting her a terrible glare, one that might have seemed more impressive if she wasn't so harmless right now, she did as Anko had told her. First things first. Her clone started. As I said before, we had nothing to do with Fugaku's death. Fuck off. Toru growled. I still don't believe that. Don't you trust your eyes? I mean your eye. You could still be lying. My name is Orochimaru, the clone said with utter conviction in her voice. Even then, Toru still noticed it was a lie. So? Could you tell or not? It would definitely make my life much easier if you did. Anko continued. It was a lie, yeah. Toru gritted out, hating the fact he could tell. What do you say, Hyaga? Hanabi's terse nod confirmed it. Good. Anko nodded. Do you need another test? No. You're either able to fool both of us, in which case it won't matter, or you're telling the truth. I don't know which option I hate the most, honestly. Anko snorted. Fair enough, but you both should count yourselves lucky you at least have these fancy eyes. Most shinobi can only rely on intuition. Toru said nothing. Which Anko was almost certain was pretty rare for him. Orochimaru-sensei, Yamanaka Ino, and the man you know as Indra. The clone continued, making sure to word it in a way that was truthful. Had nothing to do with the fifth's murder either. Toru said nothing, simply staring at her silently. Trying to figure if she was just wording things to her advantage. That complicates things a bit. He finally let out. She gave him some time. I've always wondered about it. He finally admitted. Well, my cousin and I did, but well, it was his father, so he could be a bit angrier about the whole thing. Anko nodded, loosening his bindings in a slight show of trust. He nodded gratefully, and Hanabi mostly glared at her when she did the same. It's... ah. Toru muttered. I don't know what to think of it. I'll have to tell Sasuke soon. If it's true. You can, yeah. Anko nodded. Oh, I can. Thank you for your infinite generosity. Toru snarked. Do you want to be bound again? She asked, raising an impeccable eyebrow. Nah, I'm good. Good boy. Why did you tell us this? Toru asked Anko. And why did you come to meet us for that matter? Can't you guess? Anko grinned. Oh, hell no. Hanabi growled. I'm not joining up your band of criminals. Not coming to you, am I? And he isn't either. Why was she speaking in his name? We might well be a bunch of criminals. Anko nodded. Well, some of us. But so is every village. They just so happen to be the ones declaring what's law and what's not. Morally, I'd say we still have the high ground. Toru, on the other hand, was not as quick as Hanabi to say anything. Don't tell me you're actually considering it. Hanabi said, glaring at him. You know, Hanabi-chan. If we really were negotiating right now, you'd just have done the equivalent of stabbing my foot with a rusty kunao. Toru said dryly. Hanabi turned red in her anger. Who gives a damn about that? They're a pack of vipers and traitors and dash. And murderers and power-hungry bastards, yeah. I've heard it all. Anko finished, staring at her with a mocking smile. I'm sure you'll fit right in. Toru laughed and Hanabi tried to lunge at him. Anko prevented it. What would you ask of us? Toru asked. Don't. Hanabi tried once more. I'm curious, that's all. He retorted, hands up in the air. You should listen to him a bit more. Anko said. He seems to understand what life as a missing ninja means. Of course I do. Toru chuckled darkly. I've been catching some of these guys for years. It's a miserable existence. We don't care about what the villages are up to. Anko started. And if any of us has trouble with them, we won't force you to take part in that. That includes Konoha. Because of UMI's particular location, we will never be forced to do so. You know, if something sounds too good to be true. Toru muttered. Yeah. Got you. Anko chuckled. I can't promise you we as a whole will never kill Konoha shinobi. If the circumstances call for it, well, we will. And Indra has killed several root shinobi when rescuing Ino, that part is true. I see. Toru grimaced. He had hoped this particular part might be wrong as well. And every village or organization you're likely to find out there has killed and will kill Konoha shinobi. Anko finished, shrugging. I know this already, yeah. Toru said. Still. They were my comrades in arms. Were they? Anko asked with a dry smile. I was originally from Konoha, too. So was Orochimaru. That's why we still have some sympathy for the place and try to stay away from it. Toru said nothing. He let out a long breath. Can't say I care that much about Root myself, though. Not now. Anko paused. She had expected more pushback. What do you know of Akatsuki? She finally asked. Not much. Some criminal band. You could say that. Anko deadpanned. S-class, all of them. We're going to kill them. Are you in? Toru hesitated. Look, I kinda want to live. Yeah, no guarantee about that. Anko shrugged. Nothing against you guys, but this sounds like even more dangerous than staying on our own. I think I'm going to have to refuse. Toru shrugged. Hanabi looked reassured. Anko nodded. Fair enough. Toru continued, for curiosity's sake. What do you guys have to offer? I guess there's no generous retirement plan either. Anko thought about it. No backstabbing each other, since we tend to stay away from lying, access to some very unique seal-enhanced equipment, The ability to warp all over the world. Don't say it to too many people, I'm not supposed to tell you before you're in, and for both of you, a free house on a tropical island dash. Alright, I'm in. Toru nodded eagerly. You can't be fucking serious. Hanabi raged, getting into his face and pushing him. What even goes through this thick skull of yours? Toru blinked at her vehemence. You've heard the lady dash, Anko glared at him. The amazing young woman. It's a sweet deal. How does dying against the worst monsters the shinobi world has to offer sound like a sweet deal? I'm a hunter ninja. These Akatsuki bounties must be sky high. He turned to Anko. They are, aren't they? Yup. Money's pretty good on the island, anyway. It's a booming village, expanding fast. She nodded. See. He shrugged. What about Konoha? We won't be able to get back if we ally with the people who kill Dash, who are accused of killing the previous Hokage. We're kinda traitors already. Toru shrugged. It's all or nothing. There doesn't seem to be a better way we could protect our Konoha friends than with these guys. They care more about this Akatsuki thing. You guys could also join another village, technically. Anko chuckled. Though Kumo might not be able to accept you openly, since they're allied to Konoha, and the other villages are fighting, or will be fighting against your old home. Hanabi stayed silent. Or you could even go with Akatsuki, I guess. If you're hell-bent on ruining the entire world, it's a nice place to be, I've heard. The people are pretty sociopathic though, even for our standards. Toru nodded wisely, as if he knew anything about it. Also, we could get your seal removed. Anko finally told her, making Hanabi take a sharp breath. We got some excellent seal masters on hand. One of them is kinda busy right now. In prison. But he'll be back soon. Hanabi said nothing. Toru knew what she was about to say, though. She would accept, after mulling it over a bit longer. Her mind was already set on it, she just had to justify it to herself. And that means we have business with your cousin. Anko added. What about Niji? Hanabi finally asked. Oh. He's part of it, isn't he? Yes. We'll capture or kill Hyuga Niji. Anko answered easily. Hanabi's pale lavender eyes were on Anko, seeking for a sign, any sign that would mean a lie. Promise you aren't planning to turn on us. She said quietly. I promise. Anko nodded. The only thing we want is your help with Akatsuki in our village. We won't raise our hand against you, unless you do it first, of course. There won't be any eye stealing either, if that's what you're worried about. Which is something Kumo can't promise, I'd say. Toru was paying attention, too. Hanabi's eyes were unmoving, taking in everything. Okay. She finally said. What do you mean, okay? Anko asked. I mean let's go, then. Hanabi said, quietly. To UMI, or whatever your village is. I'm in, too. Toru and Anko shared a look, and she shrugged. Sure, let's go. Anko seemed to think about something. Yeah, there's one more thing. What is it? Toru asked. I'm not sure where to start, so if you're still willing to come with me, you'll have to ask him yourself, but... What are you talking about? Toru tilted his head. How do I even say this? Get on with it. Hanabi grunted. Sarutobi Naruto is alive, he's the one you know as Indra. Anko dropped the bombshell with all the bluntness her sensei had once tried to help her get rid of. Chapter 80, Changes. Toru said nothing. Hanabi recognized the name, but she had never been particularly close to Sarutobi Naruto anyway. And that's the truth. Anko nodded again. Toru was still silent. Are you okay? Hanabi asked. Still no answer. Sorry. Anko muttered. I guess you guys were close, then. Naruto had never said too much about the whole living in Konoha thing. Silence. Did I break him? Anko asked, waving her hand in front of his face. Yes. Hanabi said dryly. Toru muttered something. What was that? Sasuke and I have been blaming ourselves for his death for years, and it turns out he's alive and hanging out on an island. Toru gritted out. I mean, you framed it in a bad way, but... Anko tried. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think I need to speak with him. Toru finished. Sure, we just need to get him out of somewhere. He got into a bit of trouble with Kumo, you see. Shouldn't be long. Orochimaru would go bail him out himself, if Karen's group didn't manage, Anko knew. Whenever he'd come back. I see. I can wait there, in UMI. Toru said, very dryly. Why do I feel like I should have written a pitch down instead of winging it? Anko thought. All right. Take my hands, both of you, then. We're going to the most amazing place in the world. Her sleeve pulled back a bit, revealing a gauntlet. Hopefully this works here, too. Anko muttered to herself. It's not the Hawaii cartoon Dash, Toru started, before they all disappeared. Somewhere on the sea, between lightning and tornadoes. Once they were sure they were not under immediate scrutiny anymore, Naruto and Ino slipped away to their sleeping quarters. Well, sleeping quarters was pushing it, kinda. It was a cramped berth with a one-person bed. Damn, that's pretty rough. Naruto said. Well, I'm not intending on sticking around to find out how comfy it really is. Ino replied. Ready to go. Never been more ready. How do we do this? I think it might be better if I break through mine and take both of us there. Your chakra is too noticeable. She said. And after days in captivity, your control is probably shot, so. Yeah, that makes sense. Ino broke through her bindings, letting out a relieved sigh as her chakra started flowing outwards again. I'll keep an eye on the door, just in case. Naruto said. Sure. She started channeling chakra, getting a feel for it again, and he took her hand. A few stressful minutes later, they disappeared with a loud crack of thunder. Strangely enough, Naruto had never realized just how at ease he felt in UMI before today. Well, his latest stay in Kumo's fanciest hotel had probably helped. No real food, no drinks, and getting beaten up for fun was not exactly his idea of a great time. The first thing he did when he arrived into the lake's stone circle was release his bindings, of course. Chakra pushed through his body at his normal rate again. It was both a relief, and painful at the same time, since his network had gotten used to working with a limited amount. He let out a grunt, feeling the lake's gentle breeze on his skin. Let's go, Ino. I need a shower, badly. Careful. I don't think your control is back to normal. Naruto snorted, ready to walk over the water. True, but I'm sure I can manage that dash. He fell right through the surface of the water. Ino dove in after him, not minding the fact that she was going to get herself entirely wet as well. It turned out to be unneeded, because he came back to the surface after just a few moments, sputtering and spitting water out. I mean, I tried to tell you. Ino chuckled. He laughed too, sheepishly. Yeah, my bad. Well, let's swim there, then. Ino offered. She definitely wasn't going to carry him. Sure. It turned out to be much slower than walking over the water, of course. The shower's water poured over him, turning reddish-brown at his feet as Naruto scrubbed himself clean. He stayed there for a while, content to let his thoughts run free, without having to bother thinking about the best way to make it out of a dark cell with his life. He got out then, using the mirror to finally remove the seals still written over his back and hand. Then he shaved, getting rid of the scruff that had started to grow on his face. How many days did he spend there, again? He felt so tired. Naruto stared at his reflection. He looked entirely fine. No bags under his eyes, no scars, nothing. For some reason, though, he felt like smashing his fist through the mirror. Neither Karen nor Sakura were around the house. Naruto helped Ino remove the seal Karen had applied on her, and the one he had written on her hand himself. After that, they were mostly lounging on the couch, in half-dazed exhaustion. They passed out in a heap before long. Naruto woke up before dawn, when Ino's foot almost kicked him in the face. He stood up, grumbling, having to remind himself where he was exactly. Ino was still laying down, snoring. He chuckled and went outside. There he limbered up, stretching, punching, kicking and dashing for over an hour. His chakra answered him again, just as strong as ever, thrumming, humming and pulsing underneath his skin. Lightning, wind, were his once more. You know, Ino, you don't actually have to keep an eye on me. Naruto said, noticing she had been observing him for a little while, now. He wiped some sweat off his brow. Someone has to make sure you're okay, though. Because you definitely won't. She just said in answer. He grunted something vaguely rude in answer, dodging under the slipper she threw at him. Wanna go for breakfast? She asked, instead of the hundreds of questions running through her mind. I'll go and buy us something. That's how they spent the morning, eating, talking, and mostly resting. Which confirmed what Ino had been thinking, despite how good he was at pretending everything was normal. Something was different about him. And it was not just about his stay in Kumo, which would have explained a great many things. It was not only about the seals carved into his skin either, Ino realized. Far from it. She knew him well. He was closer to how he was when planning something. The way he seemed fine 1 minute, smiling, grinning. And the next instant he was so quiet he seemed barely there at all, lost in something else. As long as he was talking, he was energetic, awake. There. But when he thought she was not looking, he was entirely still. And despite that, there was something entirely restless about him. Some kind of bubbling underneath the skin, that felt like the air did, the moment just before thunder struck. So whatever it was that he intended to do, Naruto was planning to do something big. They were sitting on one of the cliffs that overlooked the ocean. I'm fine, really, Ino. He said, laughing. It didn't seem to reach his eyes. She tried to push her worries away, she really did. But this cemented them. I know you're not. She said, simply. And if you don't want to talk about it, I understand completely. You never pushed either, after you rescued me. The fake smile slipped off his face. He seemed pensive. But if you ever want to talk, I'm here. Always. She said, her hand on his shoulder. He grasped it, saying nothing at first, content to stare at the wide ocean. It's not what you think. He ended up saying. It's not about the torture, or anything like that. The worst thing that did, was giving me too much time alone with my thoughts. How can you be so sure? I just know it. Physical pain, I know I heal from quickly. And as for the mental part. He chuckled, low and unamused. It's nothing worse than what my dreams usually are, really. And for the mental side as well. I heal faster than normal. We still don't know anything about the way the Nine-Tails chakra heals the mind, though. Ino interjected. Which can go either way. Naruto stressed. Ino let out a sigh. She was not about to dive into his mind, never without his permission, but his surface thoughts seemed to confirm what he was saying. The conditions of his stay in Kumo didn't really seem to come up much. Which was very unusual. What is it about, then? She finally asked. He chuckled darkly. The same shit as always. I don't want to bore you with it. You won't. She insisted. He looked at her, and for the first time, she realized he really was Orochimaru's student. For good and for bad. Al-Hawk Ino couldn't read them, there were many thoughts running through Naruto's mind. And the memories he has gained, the visions he has seen of past, present and future only confirmed what he had been thinking. No matter how things were, the villages would always find a new way to fuck each other over. The shinobi world is rotten to the core. Is what he ended up saying. Ino hesitated. The same thoughts had been on her own mind, more than a few times. Always has been. He continued. It is. She acknowledged. There's no saving bastards like Danzo, Oniki, Yagura. Nagato. Naruto distantly saw futures where things worked out decently for a while, when everybody else was cowed by a powerful enough individual or organization. No matter how many times he thought about it, that was the only way to ensure peace. Both Indra and Azura knew it, too. The world-scale equivalent of wrestling your opponent into submission. Because the world was who the opponent was. They won't change. They won't budge. They became what they had to become. Remorseless, cold, uncaring. And Danzo probably was the worst offender, here, according to what Naruto remembered. The others at least could say that they were doing their best to help the village grow. Or that they had been hypnotized into it. Or some of them, at least. Danzo seemed to be ready to actively harm his own village, if it meant gaining more personal power. And he had done so in other possible futures. Well. He amended himself. The others likely were not much better, if at all. And in all of his lives, Konoha remained the village he tended to grow up in, so it was no wonder that he had seen more of it. Because the first thing the shinobi world takes from you is your empathy. And he knew about it. Just how easy killing was becoming, every time he did so. Ino stayed silent. Guilt, regret, empathy for your enemy, they all lead to hesitation. And that will get you killed, or caught, or get the people you care about killed. That's why shinobi kill these feelings first. Or the villages do it for them, if they keep at it long enough. Because seeing your enemies as humans would make you hesitate. Ino knew this. It's true. But how could this change? As long as there are humans, and as long as there's chakra. This is almost guaranteed to happen. Peaceful nations never really lasted long. The length of time for which they existed, usually lasted from their birth to the moment their neighbors decided to militarize. There's only one thing that would make the villages listen. Power. He shrugged. Enough power to tear the world down. That's what Akatsuki is doing, isn't it? She said, unsure where he was going with that. And afraid, too. He answered slowly. They might have started with the right idea. Ino held her breath, hoping he wasn't. He continued. I don't know how they lost it on the way. Inciting wars, causing such bloodshed, controlling people from the shadows, only to have them do their bidding. Building a weapon of mass destruction or whatever it is they are doing. That's not the solution. Ino breathed out, just now realizing how tense she had been. No. He said, looking at her very, very seriously. His purple eyes almost shone. I'm trying to find a better way. Ino did not know what to say exactly. She thought, long and hard. You can't change the world alone. No. But I'm not alone. I have you. He said simply. Whether he noticed that her heart skipped a beat or not, he didn't show. And she knew that by you, he meant all of them, but just for a moment, she pushed that aside. Yes. You do. She said, coming closer to him. We'll find a way. I know it. He smiled, pulling her in. Which reminds me. He said, a bit later, after thinking about it some more. She gave him a questioning look. Yeah. It wasn't like him to be so hesitant. Of course, you really don't need to feel like you have to. But do you want us to, Link? Naruto finally asked. Ino looked at him, not saying anything. Again, you don't have to. He repeated. I thought you'd never ask. She said with a quiet voice. Huh. He blinked. Oh. I thought it was asking too much from you, considering, well, everything. And even now, I still don't know what it means exactly, or if it's going to influence you, or me, or anyone. Maybe the right decision was to not bother with it at all, he thought. There were plenty of ways they could. I think I'll be fine. Ino decided. Let's do it. You sure? I am. She repeated. Okay, then. Let's do it. Ino's cheeks turned red. What do we have to do exactly? She seemed nervous. Excited? Don't worry, it's not much, really. He reassured her. Hold my hand. Oh. That's it. He took her hand. All right, I have you. He whispered. He was so familiar with Ino that he barely had to try. Naruto reached out to Ino. Her chakra touched his, and they met midway. Wind, lightning, storm and yin earth. A tendril of chakra formed into a bond. He saw her and she saw him, wordlessly. Naruto pulled. How do I look? Probably ridiculous, she felt. Ino stood, a Tengu mask over her face, complete with a flowing white material that looked like hair coming out of its back. You'd look good in just about anything. Naruto chuckled. Thanks. She muttered, glad her face was hidden away. So, what does it do? I really have no idea yet. Anko and Toru were walking through UMI's center. And yeah, I'm sorry for us having such a rough start. Kinda. Anko said, by way of apology. Hanabi had gone away to find some place where she could study the scroll some more, in peace. I like spirited women. Toru shot back, his lone eye taking in the developing village. Yeah. He could get used to this kind of place. She snorted. You've got balls for somebody who's, what? 16. What? He shouted in outrage. I'm 18, and I look like it. I'm not really interested in kids. She said dryly. You said really? Toru pointed out. I meant to put it at the end of the sentence. But you didn't dash. Toru suddenly froze mid-sentence. Anko looked at whatever it was that he had seen. Yeah, that would do it. Uzumaki Naruto was apparently back in UMI, and he and Ino were currently discussing the merits of mangoes, compared to those of pineapples. Heatedly. Naruto noticed them. Anko. Then he saw Toru and froze too. Toru looked at him, really looked at him. It's really you. Toru breathed out. Naruto shot a worried look at Anko, unsure what to make of the situation. How did you bring them? He seemed to mouth. I guess. Naruto let out, a hand scratching the back of his head. The expressions, now that he knew about Naruto's actual identity, Toru could recognize. You. I thought you were dead. He just said. Yeah. Naruto winced. Sorry. It's. Toru stepped forward, holding his arms out, eye shiny. Naruto let him come, feeling a bit emotional himself, opening his arms for a hesitant hug. They walked closer to each other and Anko let out a somewhat fond smile, that she would later swear was just amusement at what she would pretend she had known was coming. Because Toru punched Naruto in the ear. Hard. You fucking. Naruto grunted in pain. He was walking around in circles, swearing and moaning. Why the ear? Fuck. Toru gave a long glance to Ino, but decided she really was not responsible for the shit that had happened, so he settled for a nod that she returned hesitantly. He focused back on Naruto. You still owe me a spar, don't you? Toru growled. Let's have it now. Naruto let out a long-suffering sigh, his head still ringing. Yeah, okay. Let's do that. Check the description for the links to the author.